A 11-year-old girl threw herself in front of a mafia boss's bullet, and nobody could explain why. Not the FBI agents who reviewed the security footage 47 times. Not the 200 guests who watched it happen in real time. Not even Vincent Moretti himself, Chicago's most feared criminal patriarch, a man who had survived 3 assassination attempts, 2 federal indictments, and 30 years of blood-soaked empire building. But when he looked down at the child bleeding on the marble floor and saw the silver locket around her throat, his silver locket, the one he gave to a woman who vanished 12 years ago, Vincent Moretti felt something crack open inside his chest that no bullet had ever reached. If you're already hooked, hit that like button and drop your city in the comments below. I want to see exactly how far this story has traveled. Now settle in. This one's going to take everything out of you. The Harrington Museum of Natural History had never looked so dangerous dressed up in candlelight. Crystal chandeliers threw fractured gold across the vaulted ceiling of the grand atrium, where 200 of Chicago's wealthiest citizens moved between cocktail tables draped in ivory linen, their laughter bouncing off dinosaur bones and Roman statuary. The annual Lakefront Children's Charity Gala was the kind of event that got photographed for glossy magazines, a gathering so gilded, so deliberately public, that even the most paranoid men in the city felt safe attending. Vincent Moretti was not safe anywhere. He simply had learned to look like he was. He stood near the northeast corner of the room with his back to a 12-foot marble column, a glass of Barolo held loosely in his left hand, while his right remained free and close to his body, a habit so old it had become unconscious. He was 51 years old, broad across the shoulders, with close-cropped silver hair and a face that had been broken and reset so many times it had its own architectural logic now, like a building that had survived several earthquakes and simply absorbed the damage into its bones. He wore a charcoal suit that cost $4,000 and fit him with the kind of precision that only happened when the tailor had been told, quietly, that he needed to leave room under the left arm. His security lead, a compact ex-Marine named Dario Voss, materialized at his elbow without being summoned. "Perimeter's clean," Dario said, not looking at him. "3 exits confirmed. Camera feeds look normal. Your table is positioned per spec. Sight lines blocked on 2 sides. Clear path to the service corridor on your left." The alderman's people? Already seated. His security detail is 4 guys in rented tuxedos who couldn't find their own ass with a map. They're not a problem. Vincent took a slow sip of wine. What about the Belmont Avenue footage from Tuesday? Dario's jaw tightened, just slightly, just enough for Vincent to catch it, because he had spent 30 years learning to read the involuntary language of men's faces. Still inconclusive. Could be DeLuca's crew running a surveillance pattern. Could be nothing. It's not nothing. No, probably not. Vincent let his gaze move across the room the way it always did. Not sweeping, not obviously scanning, but absorbing everything in slow, overlapping segments the way a camera pans. He had trained himself out of the instinct to look directly at things that worried him. Direct attention announced itself. Instead, he cataloged the waitstaff, 11 of them, 3 he hadn't seen before, the 2 men by the east entrance who had been standing in the same positions for 30 minutes without touching their drinks, the cluster of city council members near the bar who were laughing too hard at something that wasn't funny, the tall windows along the north wall, dark now, reflecting the room back at itself like black mirrors. And then the girl. She was standing near the dessert table along the south wall, completely alone, wearing a navy dress that was at least a size too large and shoes that had been polished so hard they caught the light like little mirrors. She was small, fine-boned, with dark brown hair pulled back in a braid that was already coming loose on one side. She looked about 10 or 11. She was eating a chocolate petit four with the focused concentration of someone rationing something precious. And she was watching the room with eyes that moved the same way Vincent's did, in slow, overlapping segments, absorbing and filing. He noticed her the way he noticed anything that didn't fit the pattern of the environment, quietly, without reaction, filing it away. Then he looked away. The alderman, a soft man named Briggs with a handshake like a wet glove, found him 12 minutes later and pulled him toward the center of the room for the obligatory photograph with the charity committee. Vincent Moretti, philanthropist, donor of $200,000 to the Lakefront Children's Fund, a man who cared deeply about the futures of Chicago's most vulnerable youth. He smiled the smile he had perfected for these moments, warm enough to read as genuine, contained enough to suggest modesty, and stood where the photographer told him to stand. The flash went off, and in the second of purple after-image blindness that followed, he heard the girl's voice, sharp, low, urgent, cutting through the ambient noise of the party with a precision that stopped his heartbeat. "Get down!" Not a scream, not a child's panicked shriek. A command. Two things happened at the same moment. Vincent's body responded to the tone of that voice before his mind could process the words, dropping his weight backward and to the left by pure reflex. And 112 pounds of 11-year-old girl launched herself through the air from his right side and slammed into him with everything she had. The shot came a half-second later. It was suppressed, not silent. Nothing in real life was ever silent the way movies pretended, but quieter than a standard report. A hard, flat crack that most of the party guests registered as something falling, a chair knocked over, a server dropping a tray. The bullet passed through the space where Vincent's head had been and struck the marble column behind him, sending a spray of stone fragments across the backs of two guests who were standing close enough to feel it. Then the girl hit the floor. The next 4 seconds were pure chaos in slow motion. Vincent's body already moving, Dario's voice already shouting, guests starting to turn toward the sound and the sudden violence of the scene. And at the center of it all, a child lying face down on the polished marble in a navy dress that was blooming dark at the left shoulder. Vincent dropped to his knees beside her before Dario could stop him. "Don't move her," Dario barked, but Vincent was already there, already pressing his hand to the wound with a steadiness that had nothing to do with calm and everything to do with a lifetime of practice at holding things together when they were breaking apart. The girl turned her head. She looked directly at him, and her eyes, brown, sharp, ferociously alert, did not have fear in them. They had something else, something that looked, improbably, like calculation. "There's a second shooter," she said. Her voice was slightly compressed with pain, but absolutely controlled. "Service entrance, northwest. He'll move in 3 minutes when the first one doesn't radio back." Vincent stared at her. "How do you—" I saw his earpiece reflection in the column, same as the first one. "Go." She blinked once, slow and deliberate, and then her eyes lost some of their sharp edge, and she made a small sound that was the first concession to pain she'd allowed herself. "I'm okay. Shoulder. Go." Dario was already in motion on the northwest side of the room, hand to his earpiece, two of their men peeling away from the crowd to follow. Vincent stayed where he was, his hand on the girl's shoulder, the white of his shirt cuff going red at the wrist. "What's your name?" he said. Not a question. A command, the same way she had spoken to him. "Hazel," she said. "Hazel what?" The edges of her mouth pulled in something that wasn't quite a smile. "Rowan," she said. "Hazel Rowan." And then, because children's bodies are honest in ways that adults train out of themselves, she passed out. The locket fell free of her collar as she went limp, a small oval of tarnished silver on a thin chain, spinning once in the chandelier light before settling against the marble floor. And Vincent Moretti, who had not felt genuine surprise in 20 years, felt the world tilt beneath him. He knew that locket. He knew every scratch on it. He had held it in his hands in a jewelry shop on West Division Street 12 years ago, and paid cash for it, and had it engraved on the back with 3 words in script, too small to read without holding it close. He had given it to a woman named Clara on a rainy October night when the city was just beginning to turn cold, pressed it into her palm, and closed her fingers around it, and told her it meant something he didn't have a better word for yet. 3 weeks later, Clara was gone. No note, no explanation, no trace that she had ever existed in his life, except for a drawer of small objects she left behind. A book, a coffee cup, a scarf, and the absolute silence where her phone number used to be. He had assumed eventually that she had done what smart women did when they saw clearly what he was. He had buried it. He had gone on. He was Vincent Moretti. Going on was the only thing he had ever been reliably good at. He reached down with fingers that were not entirely steady and lifted the locket from the floor, turned it over. The engraving on the back said, "Always find me." Those were the 3 words. His words. The ones he'd chosen when he didn't have a better word for what he felt. The room was full of screaming now, guests finally registering what had happened, his men controlling the exits, paramedics being called. Somewhere across the atrium, Dario's voice cut through the noise with the efficient brutality of a man doing exactly what he'd been trained to do. Vincent sat on the marble floor of the Harrington Museum of Natural History with a bleeding 11-year-old child and a silver locket in his hand, and felt 30 years of careful, armored certainty begin to come apart at the seams. The hospital was a controlled disaster. Mercy General's emergency wing had been locked down within 20 minutes of the paramedics' arrival. Not by the hospital, but by 4 of Vincent's men who materialized from various points across the city with the wordless efficiency of people who had rehearsed this exact scenario many times. The attending physician, a compact woman named Dr. Enara Webb, who had clearly dealt with this kind of institutional override before, kept her face carefully neutral as she assessed Hazel's wound and gave her instructions to the nursing staff in clipped, precise sentences. "Bullet passed through the deltoid muscle cleanly," she told Vincent when she came out. She looked at him the way people looked at him when they knew exactly who he was and had decided the most strategic response was to treat him like anyone else. "No arterial involvement. She'll need stitches and monitoring for the night, but she's not in danger. She was extraordinarily lucky." "She wasn't lucky," Vincent said. "She moved herself in front of it deliberately." Dr. Webb regarded him for a moment with something that might have been professional interest. "Yes, that's what the trauma presentation suggests. Children don't typically present with that kind of ballistic injury pattern from instinctive movement." She paused. "She's asking for you." "She's awake?" "She never fully lost consciousness. She coded in the ambulance for about 40 seconds but came back strong. She's been cooperative and lucid since we got her stabilized." Another pause, slightly longer. "She hasn't asked for a parent or guardian. She's asked for you, by name." Something moved through Vincent's chest that he couldn't immediately classify. He nodded once and followed the doctor through the double doors. Hazel Rowan was sitting up in the hospital bed with her left arm immobilized and an IV line in her right forearm, wearing a paper gown 2 sizes too large and an expression that belonged on someone at least 30 years older. Her braid had come entirely undone. There was a bruise forming on her left cheekbone from the impact with the marble floor. She looked at him when he came through the door without any of the wariness or performed vulnerability that sick children in hospitals usually showed adults who had power over them. She looked like someone assessing a situation and deciding how much to reveal. "You're okay," she said. "You shouldn't have done that," Vincent said. "You would have died." "You don't know that." "I do, actually." Her voice had recovered most of its precision. The medication was keeping the pain managed, but it hadn't touched whatever was behind her eyes. "The first shooter was positioned at a 23-degree angle from the column behind you. You were stationary. His sightline was locked. If you'd only dropped, it would have been enough to miss the kill shot, but you didn't drop. You stepped left, which actually put you more directly into the trajectory. If I hadn't hit you sideways, the bullet would have gone through the left side of your neck." Vincent pulled a chair to the side of the bed and sat down. "How old are you?" 11. "How does an 11-year-old know about trajectory calculations and sightlines?" The corner of her mouth did the thing again, the almost smile that wasn't quite. "I read a lot." "That's not an answer." "No," she agreed. "It's not." He leaned forward with his forearms on his knees. The hospital room was quiet except for the mechanical breathing of the monitors. Somewhere down the hallway, a phone rang twice and stopped. Vincent had spent 30 years in rooms with people who were deciding how much to tell him, and he had developed a patience for silence that most people found deeply uncomfortable. Hazel found it uncomfortable too, but she was working not to show it. He could see the slight tension in her jaw, the way her fingers on her good hand curled once around the edge of the blanket and then deliberately relaxed. "Where are your parents?" he asked. "My mom died 8 months ago." Delivered flatly, the way children delivered facts that had become load-bearing walls in their understanding of the world. Not with drama, because the drama had already been processed and compressed into this compact, survivable sentence. "I'm sorry. She was sick for a long time." A pause. It wasn't a surprise. "And your father?" Her eyes shifted. Not away. She didn't look away from him, which was itself notable. But the quality of her attention changed slightly, like a door that had been open a fraction closing to a fraction less. "My mom said he didn't know about me." "Where are you living now?" "I'm with a foster placement, the Deckers, in Pilsen." She said it without inflection, the same way she'd said everything else. But something in the word placement carried its own weight. Clinical, administrative, a word that belonged to paperwork, not to people. How long? 6 weeks? And before that? Different placements. She looked at him directly again. Why are you asking me these things? You're Vincent Moretti. You already know everything about me. You have people. He regarded her for a moment. My people are working on it, he said, but I wanted to hear it from you. Why? Because the way someone tells you something tells you more than what they say. She was quiet for a beat. Then something in her expression shifted, not softening exactly, but becoming more considered, more honest. She warned me about men like you, Hazel said. My mom. She said powerful men are the most dangerous kind because they make you feel like their protection is the same thing as safety, and it never is. Your mother was smart. She was, Hazel said. And for the first time since he'd walked through the door, the clinical precision of her voice cracked just slightly at the edges, the way frozen ground cracks in early spring. Not breaking, just showing that underneath the hardness, something was still alive and capable of being hurt. She was the smartest person I ever knew. Vincent reached into his jacket pocket and set the silver locket on the bedside table beside her water cup. Hazel looked at it. Her body went very still. Do you know what that is? He asked. A long silence. When she looked back up at him, something in her eyes had changed, still guarded, still calculating, but with a new layer of something underneath that he didn't have a name for yet. It was my mom's, she said carefully. I know, Vincent said. I gave it to her. The monitor above her bed beeped 3 times in the silence. Down the hallway, someone called a room number over an intercom. The fluorescent light hummed its flat institutional note above them. Hazel stared at him. Your mother's name, he said. It wasn't a question this time either. She answered anyway. Clara, she said. Clara Rowan. Vincent Moretti sat with that name in the space between them for a moment. The name he hadn't said aloud in 12 years. The name he'd trained himself not to say. The name that had become a kind of scar tissue over something that used to breathe. And felt the scar tissue split open cleanly, the way old wounds sometimes do. He didn't let it show on his face. 30 years of practice wouldn't let him. But his left hand, resting on his knee, curled slowly into a fist that he held for 3 seconds and then released. Get some rest, he said. His voice came out level. You're not going anywhere tonight. Mr. Moretti. Her voice stopped him at the door. He turned. She was looking at him with those old, assessing eyes, and in her left hand she was holding the silver locket. She'd picked it up from the table while he wasn't watching, which was itself a small revelation. I'm not going to trust you just because you're telling me something big, she said, if that's what you're building toward. I'm not building toward anything tonight, he said. Then what are you doing? He considered the question with more honesty than he usually permitted himself. Trying to understand, he said, what I missed. He walked back through the double doors and stood in the hallway for a moment with his back against the wall and his eyes closed, the antiseptic smell of the hospital filling his lungs, the sound of the city, a low pressure beyond the windows, and 12 years of careful, armored silence suddenly as loud as anything he had ever heard. Dario found him there 90 seconds later, which was as long as Dario ever let him be alone in a non-secure location. Second shooter is in custody, Dario said, falling into step beside him as Vincent pushed off from the wall and started moving. Belmont crew. DeLuca's people confirmed. Who authorized the hit? Working on that. Work faster. Vincent kept walking, eyes forward. The hallway was long and white and humming. Where are we on the girl's background? A small pause. Ran her ID as soon as the paramedics called in her name. Hazel Rowan, age 11, currently in DCFS placement with a Thomas and Renee Decker in Pilsen, placed 6 weeks ago following the death of her biological mother, Clara Rowan, 43, ovarian cancer, died approximately 8 months ago at St. Anthony's Hospital. Dario delivered this in the same tone he delivered everything, flat, efficient, without editorializing. No listed biological father on the birth certificate. The line is blank. Vincent stopped walking. He turned to face the wall and stood there for a moment with his hands in his pockets, looking at a framed print of the Chicago skyline that someone had hung there presumably to provide comfort, which it did not. Clara Rowan, he said, quietly. testing the weight of the name out loud in the air for the first time in a long time. You knew her. Also not a question. Dario had been with him for 22 years. Yes. A silence. The timeline of the child's birth, Dario said carefully, would be consistent with, yes, Vincent said again. Dario was quiet for 10 seconds, which was a long time for him. What do you want me to do? Vincent turned away from the skyline print and started walking again. Get me everything, he said. Clara Rowan's full history from the last 12 years. Every address, every hospital visit, every foster placement Hazel has been through, every contact Clara made before she died. His jaw was tight. And I want the Decker placement status reviewed by morning, quietly. And the DeLuca situation? That exists in a completely separate category right now and needs to be treated accordingly. His voice had hardened back into its operational register. The voice that gave orders from behind a wall that nothing could get through. The voice 30 years in the making. I want a full intelligence picture on their current leadership and what they think they know about our structure. They moved on me at a public event. That level of desperation means they believe something about our position that I want to understand before I respond. Understood. A beat. Vincent. Dario used his first name once every 6 months, and only when he was about to say something he needed the other man to actually hear. If the blood work comes back the way I think it's going to come back, it will. Then we have a completely different kind of vulnerability than anything we've ever managed before. I know, Vincent said. A child. A known child. Connected to you. I know, Dario. DeLuca's people will find out within... I know. He said it with a finality that closed the conversation, not from anger but from the simple reality that knowing something more completely than your advisor doesn't require you to keep hearing it restated. He walked through the emergency wing's outer doors into the cold Chicago night, the lake wind finding him immediately, cutting through the $4,000 suit like it cost nothing. Get me the car, and get me the Lockett's provenance report by 6 a.m. The Lockett's provenance? The engraving. I need to confirm the jeweler's record of the inscription. West Division Street, 2012. He looked out at the dark city, at the lights strung along Wacker Drive in the middle distance, at the sky that was never truly dark in Chicago, always that bruised amber from a million streetlights pushing back against the night. Chain of custody for that object matters now. He got into the car. The door closed. The city moved past the windows. Vincent Moretti sat in the back seat of his armored sedan with his hands flat on his knees and stared at nothing and did what he had done after every catastrophic moment in 30 years of catastrophic moments, he thought, methodically, systematically, without sentiment, without panic, without the luxury of feeling what he wasn't ready yet to feel. Clara had been pregnant when she left. She had been pregnant and she had known it, and she had chosen to disappear rather than tell him. She had raised a child alone. She had spent 12 years moving, evidently. The foster record suggested Hazel had been in 4 different placements, which meant Clara herself had been moving, relocating, staying ahead of something or someone. Staying ahead of him, specifically. He understood it. He didn't want to understand it, wanted, somewhere beneath the systematic thinking, to be furious about it, to feel the thing that the furious part of him was starting to form. But he understood it. He knew what Clara had seen when she'd looked at his life clearly. She had been 29 years old and not stupid, and she had seen it with perfect clarity, the way people from outside a world always saw it more clearly than the people inside it. The violence underneath the suits, the bodies underneath the legitimate business. The way that world consumed the people inside it and expanded outward and reached into everything and touched everything and left marks on everything it touched. She had made a choice. To protect a child she was carrying from the world that was coming with the man she was leaving. He could hold both things at once. He had learned to do that, to understand someone's logic while also knowing that the logic had cost him something that couldn't be returned. 11 years. An 11-year-old girl who read about ballistic trajectories and assessed rooms the way he did, and threw herself in front of a bullet at a charity gala with the command presence of a soldier. Get down. Not a child's voice, not a child's instinct. Something trained, something practiced, something Clara had built into her, piece by careful piece, over 11 years. He thought about Clara sitting with a small dark-haired girl and teaching her, what? How to assess a room. how to identify exits, how to read the people around her for the ones who didn't belong, how to stay alive in a world that she'd correctly identified as hunting them both, even if the child didn't know yet exactly what the hunt was or why. Clara had prepared Hazel for a world she hoped Hazel would never have to navigate. And then Clara had gotten sick, and the preparation had passed itself forward into this moment. A museum atrium, a dressed-up crowd, a sniper's reflection in polished marble, a child making a decision in less than a second, saving his life. The life that Clara had spent 12 years keeping her away from. The car moved through the city. Vincent looked out the window and watched Chicago pass in amber and shadow, and somewhere behind his sternum, in the place where things he didn't permit himself to feel were kept compressed and controlled, something was building pressure that hadn't been there this morning. By the time the car reached his building on North Lakeshore Drive, he had organized it back into something manageable. He had done what he always did, taken the wreckage and found its structural logic and decided what to build from it. What he was going to build from this, he didn't know yet. But he knew that whatever DeLuca's people were planning, whatever war was coming, whatever the next 48 hours held, all of it had shifted. The landscape had changed. The calculation was different now. He had a daughter. He had a daughter he'd never met, who didn't trust him, who had saved his life, who wore his locket around her neck, and who had last spoken to him from a hospital bed with the steady, wary eyes of a child who had already learned not to expect people to stay. He had a daughter. And there were men in this city who would figure that out by morning, and when they did, they would immediately understand that the thing that could not be destroyed from the outside, the thing that had made Vincent Moretti effectively invincible for 30 years, was the fact that there had been nothing they could threaten that he loved enough to break him. That calculation was over now. It was nearly 3 in the morning when the first call came in from Marcus DeLuca himself. Vincent's personal cell rang once, a number that approximately 9 people in the world had, and Marcus DeLuca was not supposed to be one of them. He answered on the second ring. Vincent. DeLuca's voice was smooth the way expensive motor oil was smooth. Engineered slipperiness, nothing natural underneath it. He was 54, second-generation outfit, had inherited his family's territory on the south side from a father who'd built it with genuine brutality. Marcus himself was smarter than his father and more patient, which made him considerably more dangerous. "I heard there was some trouble tonight. I'm glad you're safe." "Are you?" Vincent said. "Of course. What kind of city becomes if men like us can't attend a charity event without Marcus?" His voice was flat and quiet. "Don't." A pause on the other end. When DeLuca spoke again, the motor oil had thinned slightly. "I'm calling as a professional courtesy. You called to find out if I survived." "Vincent, and to hear how I sound, whether I'm rattled." He moved to the window of his penthouse, looking out at the lake in the darkness, the faint glitter of lights from the Indiana shore. "I'm not rattled. Your people used suppressed rifles at a public event with 200 witnesses, and a child took the bullet. You know what that means for how I respond." "I don't know what you're talking about." "Yes, you do." He let the silence sit for 3 seconds. Exactly the right length. "The professional courtesy goes both ways, Marcus, so I'll extend you one. Whatever you think you know about my position right now, whatever intelligence you have that made you believe this was the right moment, it's wrong. And before you commit fully to what you're planning, you should ask yourself whether the person who sold you that intelligence had reasons of their own for wanting us at each other's throats." A longer pause. "That's a very interesting thing to say." "It's the last interesting thing I'm going to say to you for a while," Vincent said. "Good night." He ended the call, stood at the window for a long time. Then he took out a different phone, one that connected to a number he hadn't dialed in 10 years, and called a woman named Sylvia Crane, who was the most thorough private investigator in the state of Illinois and who owed him a debt that had been sitting between them, uncollected, for a decade. She picked up on the third ring, her voice carrying the rough edge of someone pulled out of sleep who was already processing the fact that this call, at this hour, from this number, meant something significant had changed. "I need everything Clara Rowan left behind," he said without preamble. "Letters, documents, storage units, anything in the possession of the DCFS case file, anything her daughter might be holding." A pause. "And Sylvia, I need to know if Clara left anything for the girl to find when she was older. Instructions. A name. anything she prepared her to receive. Silence on the other end. Then, "Vincent, you understand what you're looking for means." "I know exactly what it means." "Okay." Her voice shifted to the brisk professionalism that had made her exceptional at her work. "Give me 72 hours." "You have 48, he said, and ended the call. He stood at the window until the sky began to lighten. Not toward dawn yet, just the first faint suggestion of it, the darkness giving a fraction at the eastern edge above the lake. His phone showed 6 missed calls from his lawyer, 2 from his consigliere, 11 from various family members and associates who had heard about the gala and needed reassurance or information or instructions. He would answer all of them. He would manage all of it. That was what he did. But first he stood at the window in the lightning dark and let himself, for just a moment, hold the thing he'd been compressing all night. The image of a small girl in a navy dress launching herself sideways through a crowd, moving without hesitation toward danger rather than away from it. Not out of bravery exactly, but out of a decision already made, a calculation already completed before anyone else in the room had even registered the threat. "Get down." Her voice in his ears, clear and precise and afraid of nothing. He had a daughter. And somewhere across this city, Marcus DeLuca was already working the phones with what he thought was the full picture of what had happened tonight. He was already building his strategy on intelligence he didn't know was compromised, around a target he didn't know had changed. Because what DeLuca didn't know, what nobody knew yet except the man standing at this window, was that the silver locket lying in a hospital bedside table in Mercy General's pediatric wing had just rewritten everything, every calculation, every vulnerability, every reason to walk away from 30 years of blood and empire and the slow, grinding machinery of a life that had never once left room for the thing it had just, against all probability, produced. By morning, DeLuca would know there was a girl. By morning, Vincent would need to have already decided what he was willing to burn down to keep her safe. He turned from the window, picked up the phone with the 9 contacts, dialed Dario. "Get the inner council together," he said when Dario answered. 7 a.m., not the office, the lakeshore location. He paused. "And Dario, nobody outside the inner 7 hears the word daughter until I say otherwise. Not a whisper, not a suggestion, not a pronoun." "Understood," Dario said. "If it leaks before I'm ready, it won't." Vincent ended the call, stood in the quiet of his penthouse. The city spread below him, going from black to dark blue as the sky considered morning, and felt the shape of what was coming the way you felt a storm system before it arrived. In the pressure of the air, in the changed quality of the silence, in the deep animal knowledge that everything standing before the wind hit would need to either be stronger than the storm or willing to be taken apart and rebuilt. He had built this empire on the certainty that nothing could reach him. A child had just proven him wrong. And somewhere in the mathematics of that, in the terrifying arithmetic of what it meant to finally, after 51 years, have something the world could use against you, there was also something else. Something he hadn't felt in so long he almost didn't recognize it. It felt like a reason. He walked toward the hallway, and the gray approaching morning, and the empire that had defined every hour of his adult life waited quietly around him, holding its breath, sensing that its master had come back from the Harrington Museum a different kind of dangerous than the one who had left. At 6:47 a.m., a DCFS caseworker named Patricia Owen arrived at Mercy General to take custody of Hazel Rowan and return her to the Decker placement in Pilsen, standard procedure following a minor's overnight medical hold. The caseworker was met at the entrance by 2 men in suits who presented documentation she had never seen the format of before, authorizing a temporary protective custody transfer pending active threat assessment. Patricia Owen called her supervisor. Her supervisor called the district office. The district office called a number that connected to a law firm that did not advertise. 40 minutes later, the paperwork was resolved, and Hazel Rowan was still in the hospital room. When the nurse brought her breakfast, Hazel was sitting up in bed with a notebook she'd asked for, writing something in very small, precise handwriting. The nurse asked what she was writing. "Making a list," Hazel said. "Of what?" Hazel looked up. "Everything I need to find out before I decide whether to trust him." The nurse nodded, reasonably certain she was not equipped to respond to this, and left the breakfast tray. Outside the window, Chicago was beginning its Tuesday morning with its customary lack of sentiment, The lake going from black to green gray in the low October light, the city indifferent to lockets and daughters, and the way a man's careful, armored life could come apart in a single second of chandelier-lit marble and a child's voice cutting through noise like a blade. Get down. The list had 12 items on it already, and Hazel was still writing. The list had 19 items on it by the time Vincent came back. Hazel heard him before she saw him. Not his footsteps, which were quiet for a man his size, but the change in the hallway outside her door, the way the low murmur of hospital noise reorganized itself around his presence, the way water reorganizes around a stone dropped into it. She closed the notebook, not to hide it. Just because she had decided, somewhere between items 14 and 19, that she wasn't going to let him see what she was thinking until she understood more about what he was. He came through the door at 8:12 a.m. carrying 2 cups of coffee and wearing a different suit from last night. Charcoal again, but lighter. The shirt beneath it a dark blue that made him look less like a funeral and more like a storm front. He had shaved. His eyes were the color of old iron, and they looked like they hadn't closed for a single minute of the night, which Hazel suspected was accurate. He set one of the coffees on her tray table without asking if she wanted it. "I'm 11, she said. "It's mostly milk," he said, and sat down in the chair beside the bed the same way he'd sat the night before. Forearms on his knees, weight forward, nothing casual about the posture even when it looked casual. "How's the shoulder?" "It hurts." "Are they managing it?" "Yes." He nodded once, drank his coffee, looked at the window where the October morning was coming through gray and flat off the lake. She watched him do it and catalogued what she saw. The way his jaw moved when he wasn't speaking, the micro-tension in the muscles there, the way his left hand, resting on his knee again, was holding itself slightly too still in a way that meant it wanted to be doing something else. Her mother had taught her to read hands. "Hands tell you what the face is too practiced to say," Claire had told her once, when Hazel was 7 and learning to be afraid of the right things. "You're going to try to tell me something," Hazel said. He looked at her. "Yes." "And you've decided I can handle it." "I've decided you've already figured out most of it." She kept her face level. Inside, something cold moved through her chest. Not fear, or not only fear, but the particular sensation of a thing you've half known for a long time, stepping out of the shadows and becoming real and solid and unavoidable. "My mother's locket," she said, "and the fact that I look like you around the eyes." He was quiet for a moment. "Your eyes are hers," he said, "but the way you use them is mine." It was such a specific thing to say that it broke through something she'd been holding, not broke through in a way that showed she was Clara Rowan's daughter, and Clara Rowan's daughter did not show things before she'd decided to, but broke through internally, in the place where the 19-item list lived. She picked up the coffee, drank some. It was mostly milk, and it was too sweet, and it was the first warm thing she'd had since yesterday afternoon at the gala, where she'd been eating a chocolate petit four and watching a room and identifying a man she'd never met before as the man she'd spent her whole life being kept away from. "Tell me," she said, "whatever you've decided to tell me." So he did. He didn't dress it up. She had expected him to, had expected the version of this conversation that adults usually gave children, the one with soft edges and strategic omissions and the underlying architecture of "we'll tell you more when you're older," which was a sentence that had never once in Hazel's experience meant anything other than "we don't think you can handle the real thing." But he didn't do that. He told her about Clara, about how they'd met 12 years ago through a mutual acquaintance at a restaurant on Rush Street, and how Clara had been 31 and sharp-tongued and entirely unimpressed by him, which had been novel enough that he'd pursued it. He told her about the locket. He told her without flinching what he was not the euphemistic version, not the businessman version, but the actual thing, stated plainly. The family, the structure, the violence underneath the legitimate surface, the specific nature of the world Clara had been inside when she was with him. "And she left," Hazel said when he paused. "She left," he confirmed, "because of what you are. Because of what she knew I wouldn't stop being." Hazel looked at him. The morning light was doing something to his face that made him look less invulnerable, showed the lines in it, the way the skin sat differently around his eyes than it did on a man who'd slept. "She was right," Hazel said, "wasn't she?" "About most of it." He set his coffee cup down on the tray table. "She was wrong about one thing." "What?" He looked at her directly. She thought I wouldn't have chosen differently. She never gave me the chance to find out. The room was very quiet. Hazel could feel her heartbeat in her shoulder where the stitches were, a low, persistent throb that the medication kept from being sharp. She thought about her mother, not the sick version, not the last 8 months of Clara going gray and thin in a hospital bed, much like this one, fighting something that couldn't be fought, but the before version, the one who cooked badly and read constantly and woke Hazel up some Saturday mornings to drive somewhere. She hadn't told her yet, just get in the car, we're going somewhere. And they'd end up at a diner in a town Hazel had never heard of, eating pancakes, and Clara would look out the window with an expression Hazel had never been able to fully read. She understood it now. She wished she didn't. I'm not going to tell you she was wrong, Hazel said. She was my mother. No, Vincent said. I'm not asking you to. And I'm not going to trust you because of biology. I know. Biology is just... She stopped, looked for the right word. Data, she said. It doesn't tell me who you actually are. Something shifted in his expression, not softening, but something adjacent to recognition, like hearing a word he knew in a language he hadn't expected. What would, he said. I don't know yet, she said. I'm working on it. He almost smiled. Not quite. The muscles around his mouth moved in the direction of it and then returned to neutral, but she clocked it, filed it. There are men in this city, he said, shifting registers, his voice dropping a degree in temperature, who are going to find out about you. If they haven't already, and when they do, they'll use me, she said, to get to you. Yes. My mom was afraid of that. Your mom was smart. You keep saying that. It keeps being true. He leaned back slightly. I need you to come somewhere safer than this hospital. Somewhere my people can maintain a proper perimeter. I have a property on the North Shore that... No, she said. He stopped. I don't know you, she said. I'm not going to a private location with a man I don't know because he says it's safer. That's literally one of the first things my mom taught me. Hazel, and I know you can probably make the paperwork happen. You already did something with the DCFS caseworker this morning. I heard the nurses talking, but that's not the same as me agreeing. He looked at her for a long moment. She held the look without flinching because she'd had 11 years of practice holding looks from people who believed their authority was supposed to make her fold. What would you need, he said finally, to agree? Time, she said, and to keep the notebook. The notebook. The list I'm making, it's mine. You don't get to see it. He was quiet for 3 seconds. All right, he said. 3 days. You stay here. Hospital security plus my people outside the building. On the 4th day, we reassess. I want a number I can call that isn't yours. He raised an eyebrow. If something happens to you, she said practically, I need someone I can reach who knows the situation, not your main security guy, someone separate. He studied her face for a moment with an expression that was harder to read than any he'd shown her yet. Not calculating, not careful, but something rawer than either of those. Like a man looking at something that surprised him and wasn't sure if the surprise was good or terrible or both. I'll get you a number, he said. The number he gave her connected to Sylvia Crane, though he didn't tell Hazel that. What Sylvia Crane was telling him by 9:30 that Tuesday morning was making the coffee in his stomach sit like concrete. He took the call in the hospital's first-floor family consultation room, which his men had cleared, and stood at the window looking at the parking structure across the street while Sylvia talked. Clara didn't just leave Chicago, Sylvia said. Her voice had the particular quality of someone who had been doing difficult work all night and was now delivering results without editorializing because she was too tired for anything else. She left a constructed life, different name in 3 of the 4 cities she moved through: Milwaukee, Cincinnati, Indianapolis, and then back to Chicago 6 months before she died. A pause. She came back, Vincent. She came home to die. Why Chicago? Best guess? She wanted Hazel somewhere familiar, a city she knew. She was planning ahead. She'd been sick for 2 years by then. She knew how it ended. She put Hazel in a school in Bridgeport, got her enrolled in the DCFS system preemptively so the transition would be smoother. Another pause. She was meticulous about it, every placement form filled out in advance. letters to the caseworkers explaining Hazel's history and needs. The woman spent the last year of her life making sure her daughter's transition into the system was as survivable as possible. Vincent said nothing. "There's more," Sylvia said. "Go." The Indianapolis address. She was there for 4 years, Hazel ages 5 through 9. The neighbor I spoke to this morning said Clara had a very specific routine. Kept to herself mostly, but every 6 months she'd have a kind of audit, the neighbor called it. Went through everything in the apartment, updated documents she kept in a fireproof box. The neighbor saw it once by accident, through the open door. Said it looked like a full intelligence package. IDs, contacts, cash reserves, a map with locations marked. His jaw tightened. She was preparing for extraction. More than that, she was preparing Hazel for extraction, teaching her. The neighbor said Clara used to take Hazel to public places, museums, train stations, shopping centers, and run what she called observation games, looking for who's in the room, identifying exits, noticing people who didn't fit. The marble column, the sniper's reflection. A child who looked at a room the way an intelligence professional looked at a room. Clara trained her, he said. Not surprised. Just saying it out loud so it existed in the air between them. Intensively, Sylvia said. And there's a fireproof box. Current location unknown. Hazel would know where it is. Based on the pattern, Clara would have left it somewhere accessible to the girl and not to DCFS. He turned away from the window. One more thing. Why didn't she contact me? 12 years. She moved 4 times, kept documentation on everything, clearly remained aware of what I represented as a risk. Why not contact me? Give me the chance to... I found a letter, Sylvia said quietly. Draft, never sent. In the Indianapolis papers that the neighbor preserved after Clara moved out. She left a box of things, said the neighbor could throw them out, but the neighbor kept them. The sound of papers on the other end. Do you want me to read it? Yes. A breath. Then Sylvia's voice, reading someone else's words in the flat, careful tone of a professional handling an object that had weight. Vincent, I have written this 17 times and deleted it 17 times, and the 17th deletion was when I understood that I am never going to send this, and the reason I am never going to send it is not that I don't trust you with the truth, but that I don't trust myself with your answer. If you said come back, I would. And coming back would give our daughter a father and take away the only safe life I know how to build for her. I'm not strong enough to choose correctly if you ask me to choose, so I'm not giving you the chance to ask. Silence on the line. That's where it ends, Sylvia said. The draft. Vincent stood in the family consultation room with the parking structure outside the window and the muffled sounds of a hospital going about its morning beyond the door, and the draft of a letter Clara Rowan wrote and deleted 17 times sitting in the air of the room. Send me everything, he said. His voice was level, professionally, impressively level. The box contents, the neighbor's full account, the DCFS files. By noon, Sylvia said. He ended the call. Stood there, then took a breath that he didn't let expand into anything bigger than strictly necessary, and walked back out into the hallway and went to find Dario, because Dario was waiting with the thing that couldn't be ignored any longer. The DeLuca problem, the war that was already moving, whether Vincent attended to it or not. The Inner Council met at 10 a.m. in the back room of a sheet metal fabrication company in Bridgeport that had been legitimate for 30 years. And laundered nothing but also happened to have a soundproofed conference room behind the production floor which hummed and clanked with the polite indifference of industry. 7 men sat at a steel table. Vincent stood. DeLuca hit us at the Harrington, he said, without preamble. Suppressed rifles, 2 shooters, the second positioned as backup. Professional acquisition, not a street decision. He's had this planned for at least 2 weeks based on the surveillance pattern we flagged on Belmont. He looked around the table. He moved because he believes we're exposed. He got intelligence that suggested a structural weakness in our position, either leadership uncertainty, financial pressure, or internal fracture. I want to know which one he was sold and who sold it. Sal Conti, who was 60 and had been with the family since before Vincent took over, shifted in his chair. He was the oldest man at the table and the one most likely to say the thing no one else would. The question that's sitting in this room, he said, is what last night actually did to our structural position. The hit failed, which is worse for DeLuca than if it had worked. A failed assassination is a declaration with no follow-through. But if there's now a... He paused, measuring his words with the care of a man who knew they had weight. A change in your personal circumstances that DeLuca's people become aware of. The calculus shifts. Fast. The personal circumstances are contained, Vincent said. For now, Sal said. For now, Vincent agreed. He didn't elaborate. The 7 men at the table were the 7 people outside a hospital room on the north side who knew the word daughter, and they would remain that way. DeLuca's next move comes within 72 hours. He has to act before the failed attempt can be spun as an aberration. If he waits longer, it looks like indecision, which undermines the whole premise of the power play. So he moves fast, and when he moves on multiple fronts simultaneously to divide our response capacity. We hit first, said Tommy Reardon, who was 38 and ran operations on the west side and thought most problems were solved by hitting them first. He wasn't wrong often enough to be dismissed. We don't hit first, Vincent said. We make him show us the full shape of what he's built before we dismantle it. If we move now, we're reacting to the parts we can see. I want to see the whole thing. Tommy's jaw set. He tried to kill you last night. Yes. In a room full of civilians and children. Yes. And we're going to wait. We're going to be strategic, Vincent said, which is the reason we're still here after 30 years, and every family that ran on impulse is either in federal prison or in the ground. He let that sit. Tommy absorbed it with the expression of a man who didn't like being right about being wrong. Dario, what do we have on DeLuca's current structure? Dario had a folder on the table in front of him that he hadn't opened. He didn't open it now. 32 confirmed operational personnel, Southside territory running from Bronzeville down to Roseland. His main revenue streams are protection, contract logistics, and 3 establishments in the Pilsen corridor that are clean on the surface. A pause. He has a federal informant problem. Our source inside the Organized Crime Division says there's been an uptick in DeLuca-related intelligence flowing to the task force in the last 6 weeks. Somebody in his organization is talking. Which means he's nervous, Vincent said. A nervous man at war is more dangerous than a calm one, not less. He makes faster decisions with less information. He straightened. I want eyes on every DeLuca lieutenant within the next 8 hours. Passive surveillance only. And I want his financial lines mapped. If the federal pressure is tightening, he needs this war to produce territory and revenue fast, which means he'll make a move we can predict if we understand what he needs. There's one more thing, Sal said. He had the measured tone of someone who had waited for the right moment and decided this was it. The leak. Whoever gave DeLuca the intelligence that made him believe we were weak enough to move on, that person is in a room that has access to our internal situation. We have a problem that isn't DeLuca. The fabrication plant hummed around them. 7 men at a steel table sat with that for a moment. Yes, Vincent said. We do. He got back to the hospital at 1 in the afternoon. Hazel was not in her room. The nurse at the station told him, with the apologetic efficiency of someone relaying information they knew would not be well received, that the patient had asked to walk the floor for physical therapy purposes and had been accompanied by one of Mr. Moretti's men to the family lounge at the end of the corridor. He walked to the family lounge, found Hazel sitting at a table by the window with her notebook open, and his man, a quiet former Army Ranger named Cole, standing by the door in a posture of respectful distance. Across the table from Hazel, in one of the orange vinyl chairs, sat a woman Vincent had not authorized to be there. She was in her late 40s, broad-shouldered, with the kind of practical face that had never invested much in impression management. She was wearing a gray blazer over a white shirt, and there was a DCFS lanyard around her neck, though she'd turned it around so the ID faced inward. She looked up when Vincent walked in and met his eyes without flinching. Cole said immediately, "She came through the main entrance with proper authorization, Mr. Moretti. I was assessing whether to remove her when—" "It's okay," Hazel said. She wasn't looking at Vincent. She was looking at the woman across from her with an expression that had gone very still and very focused. "She's my caseworker, Patricia. She's been my caseworker for 6 weeks." Vincent looked at the woman. "Patricia Owen?" "Yes." Her voice was flat and steady. "I'm not here in an official DCFS capacity. I came on my own time." She held his gaze. "I came because I needed to tell Hazel something directly, and because I didn't think it should go through you." Tell her what, Vincent said. Patricia Ohen looked at Hazel, not at him. Your mother left something with me, she said, before she died. She came to the DCFS office in person 8 months ago, 2 weeks before she passed. She said she was putting her daughter into the system and she needed the caseworker assigned to Hazel to hold something for her. In case. A pause. She gave me a key. The room was very still. A key to what? Hazel said. Her voice was entirely controlled. Only her hands, on the edge of the notebook, told a different story, the fingers tightening, the knuckles going pale. A storage unit, Patricia said, on Archer Avenue. She reached into the breast pocket of her blazer and set a small brass key on the table between them. She told me to give it to Hazel directly, not to DCFS, not to any guardian, only to Hazel when Hazel was ready to ask for it. She never told me about it, Hazel said. She said you'd find your way to needing it, Patricia said. She said you were the kind of kid who always found what she needed when she needed it. Hazel looked at the key for a long moment. Then she looked up at Vincent. He looked back at her. I want to go, she said. Today. Hazel, it was left for me. Her voice had a current running underneath it now, something that wasn't anger but was close enough to be its cousin. My mother left it for me. Not for you. For me. The DeLuca situation. I don't care about the DeLuca situation. She said it without raising her voice, and somehow the absence of volume made it louder. I have spent my entire life caring about other people's situations. My mom's situation, the foster system situation, every placement situation. I have one thing my mother left for me and I'm going to get it. Vincent looked at her for 3 seconds. Then he looked at Cole. Then he looked at Patricia Ohen, who was watching this exchange with the careful neutrality of a woman who had spent 20 years in social services and had learned to read the structural dynamics of a room with the same systematic attention that Hazel read everything. Today, he said finally, but my people come with us, both of us, and you don't go in alone. Hazel considered this. You stay outside, she said. Cole can come in. I go in, Vincent said, or we don't go. A silence. Hazel's jaw moved, the same micro-tension he'd seen in his own reflection that morning. She picked up the key from the table and closed her fingers around it. Fine, she said, but whatever's in there is mine. You look, but you don't take anything without asking. Agreed. And you don't make any decisions about what we do next until I've read everything. He studied her face, this 11-year-old face with Clara's eyes and his jaw, and the expression of someone who had been negotiating for survival since before she had the vocabulary for it, and felt something in his chest do the thing he kept trying to prevent it from doing. Agreed, he said. The storage facility on Archer Avenue was a gray concrete building with a chain-link fence and bad overhead lighting, the kind of place that existed in the margins of a city, utilitarian, anonymous, used by people who needed to keep things the world didn't need to see. Unit 114 was at the end of the second corridor, and the key fit, and the padlock opened with the specific mechanical click of a thing that had been waiting a long time to be used. Hazel pushed the door up herself, with her good arm. Inside was a fireproof lockbox, a folding camp chair, a single cardboard box with H written on the side in Clara's handwriting. Vincent recognized it from letters she'd written him 12-year-old letter, the small hook at the base of the H. And on top of the lockbox, held there by a strip of medical tape, a sealed envelope, also addressed in Clara's hand. Also reading simply, H. Hazel stood in the entrance of the storage unit for a moment without moving. Vincent stood 2 feet behind her and slightly to the right and said nothing, because there was nothing to say that wasn't an intrusion. Then she walked in and sat on the camp chair and opened the envelope. She read it in silence. He watched her do it. Watched her face the way he'd been watching her face since the hospital room, learning its language, learning which movements meant which things. He watched her read, and he watched the careful control of her expression hold through the first page and into the second, and then, at some point in the second page, he watched it crack. Not collapse. Not break. Just crack. A fracture along a fault line that had been under pressure for 8 months. The specific fracture of someone who was reading something they both needed to hear and couldn't bear to hear because the person who wrote it was gone, and reading their words was the closest you could get to them now, and the closest was not close enough. She made no sound. Her eyes filled and she did not let the tears fall, and Vincent watched her refuse to let them fall with a specific recognition that hit him somewhere below the sternum. He had taught himself the same skill, different circumstances, same mechanism. Hazel read to the end of the letter, folded it, held it in her good hand against her knee. "She knew about you," she said. Her voice was steady, barely. "She knew you'd find me eventually. She says," a breath. "She says she doesn't want me to trust you because of what she felt for you. She says that's not a good enough reason." Another breath. "She says to watch what you do, not what you say, what you do." "She was right," Vincent said. He said it quietly but without qualification. "She says you're going to want to fix things fast." Her eyes came up and met his across the width of the storage unit. "She says that's how you're built, and that the fixing is going to be for you as much as for me, and I should know the difference." He held the look, didn't deflect from it. "Also right," he said. Hazel looked down at the letter again. "She says she's sorry," she said, "for keeping you from me." A pause that lasted several seconds. "She says she'd do it again, but she's still sorry." The overhead light in the unit hummed. Somewhere in the corridor behind them, Cole was maintaining his distance with professional discretion. Vincent Moretti stood in a concrete storage unit on Archer Avenue, with the afternoon going gray outside and a child sitting in a camp chair reading a dead woman's letter and held perfectly still because anything else would have been wrong, and let the apology from a woman 12 years gone settle into the room around him. "I know," he said, and he did. And it was both enough and not enough, exactly as it should be. Hazel set the letter down on her knee, reached for the lockbox, tried the latch with one hand, couldn't manage it with the shoulder, and after a moment held it out to him. He crossed the unit and crouched in front of her and worked the latch, opened it, angled it so she could see inside first. Documents. A second envelope sealed with a different tab, also addressed to H, but with a note beneath it in smaller handwriting. "Not until you're ready, you'll know." A small cloth bag that clinked with the sound of coins or small metal objects. A photograph, face down. And a thumb drive. Hazel reached in and picked up the photograph. Turned it over. It was a picture of Clara that Vincent recognized. She was 29 in it, standing at a railing somewhere above the city, and she was laughing, and the wind was pulling her hair sideways, and she was looking at someone off camera with an expression of such uncomplicated happiness that it was almost difficult to look at directly. He was the one off camera. He remembered the day. He remembered what he'd said to make her laugh like that. Hazel looked at the photograph for a long time. Then she looked at him. "She was happy," she said. "In this." "Yes," he said. "With you." "For a while," he said. "Yes." Hazel turned the photograph back over and held it in her lap and closed her eyes and breathed, slowly and deliberately, in through her nose and out through her mouth, the way someone did when they were managing something large in a container that was not quite large enough. Then Vincent's phone rang. He looked at the screen. Dario. He rejected it. It rang again immediately. He answered. "We have a problem," Dario said. The quality of his voice, Dario, who delivered everything in the same tone regardless of content, had changed in a way that Vincent in 22 years had heard exactly 4 times. "What?" "Tommy Reardon," Dario said. "He's gone. Left his post 2 hours ago. His security phone is dead. And 20 minutes ago, Marcus DeLuca's people swept the Archer Avenue corridor." A pause that lasted exactly 2 seconds. "Vincent, they know where you are." Vincent was on his feet before Dario finished the sentence, hand already out to Hazel, eyes already on the unit entrance, 30 years of operational reflex compressed into a single motion toward the door. "Up," he said to Hazel. "Now, leave everything." She was already moving, already on her feet, letter in her good hand, photograph shoved into the pocket of the hospital clothes she was still wearing, the lockbox left open on the floor. "Tommy," Vincent said into the phone, moving. "Our leak," Dario said. "He sold us, Vincent. He sold you, and he sold the girl." Vincent hit the corridor at a controlled run with Hazel 1 step behind him, and behind them the storage unit stood open in the humming fluorescent light, with the lockbox open and the photograph gone, and the thumb drive sitting in the dark, waiting, and outside the chain-link fence the sound of car doors was already starting. There was no version of the next 60 seconds that did not require choices. Vincent had been hoping he still had time to avoid making. That time was over. The car doors were the wrong sound. Vincent had spent 30 years learning the language of threat. The specific register of sound that meant danger was organizing itself in your direction, and the sound of 3 car doors opening in sequence outside the chain-link fence of a storage facility on Archer Avenue on a gray Tuesday afternoon was not the sound of civilians. It was too coordinated, too deliberate. The pauses between each door were identical, which meant rehearsed, which meant professional, which meant DeLuca had not sent street muscle. He had sent people who had done this before. "Cole," Vincent said, not raising his voice. Cole was already moving from the mouth of the corridor, hand inside his jacket, body angled to give himself a sightline to the facility entrance without exposing his position. He had the compact economy of movement that came from actual training, not the performed aggression of men who wanted to look dangerous, but the specific conservation of a man who understood that speed in a close-quarter situation was less about fast motion than about never making a motion that didn't count. "2 at the gate," Cole said quietly. "Third one staying with the vehicle. The 4th. "Northwest corner of the fence," Hazel said. Both men looked at her. She was standing at the back edge of the corridor, good arm at her side, the hand holding the letter from her mother pressed flat against her thigh. Her eyes were moving in the pattern Vincent had now identified as her specific operational mode. The room reading, the segment-by-segment absorption of information that Clara had built into her over 11 years. "He went around the outside of the fence 3 minutes ago," she said. "I heard the gravel. He's covering the secondary exit." Vincent looked at Cole. Cole gave a single nod that said, "She's right. 4 men, 1 vehicle, a coordinated approach covering primary and secondary egress. This was not an improvised operation. This was a planned extraction, which meant DeLuca's people had known more than the address. They had known the layout. Tommy gave them the facility map," Vincent said. Quiet. Flat. "Looks like," Cole said. Hazel said, "There's a drainage culvert under the east wall. I saw it when we came in. It goes under the fence. The grate is corroded. You could pull it loose." "You're not going through a drainage culvert," Vincent said. "I've been in worse," she said, and the absolute matter-of-fact quality of it. A child, 11 years old, saying "I've been in worse" with the same tone other children used to discuss homework, hit him somewhere that didn't have a name. He pulled out his phone. Dario picked up before the first ring finished. "Tell me you have eyes on Archer Avenue," Vincent said. 2 minutes out, Dario said. "I've got 4 people coming from the south end. What's your count?" 4. Coordinated. They have the layout." "Tommy's people?" "Tommy's defection," Vincent said. "Yes." A breath on the other end. Then Dario, in the voice he used when he was processing something catastrophic and converting it in real time into logistics. "The south vehicle is 40 seconds out. I need you at the east wall in 90 seconds. "The culvert," Hazel said again, from just behind him. She was looking at him with the patient expression of someone who had arrived at a correct conclusion and was waiting for the adults to catch up. He looked at Cole. "Take her through the culvert. I'll draw the 2 at the gate." "Vincent, that's not a discussion, Cole." Cole absorbed this. Looked at Hazel. "Can you move fast with the shoulder?" "Yes," she said. "Then let's go." Vincent turned to Hazel. She was already looking at him with those old eyes, and what was in them was not fear and not helplessness, but something that was, and this was the thing that kept catching him unprepared, the thing he had not built any internal structure to manage, something that looked, cautiously, like trust that was deciding whether to commit. 90 seconds, he said. "You get through the wall and Dario's people will be there." She looked at him for 1 second. Then she said, "Don't get shot," and turned and followed Cole toward the east end of the corridor. He watched her go for exactly 3 steps, which was all he allowed himself. Then he turned toward the facility entrance and walked into what was coming. What followed lasted 4 minutes and was not heroic in any cinematic sense. It was 2 men at a gate making a decision about whether the man walking toward them was as dangerous as his reputation, and learning, in the specific hard way that men in their profession learn things, that reputation was sometimes accurate. It was Vincent Moretti with 30 years of violent pragmatism and a Beretta he'd carried daily since he was 22, doing what he'd always been able to do in the moments when there was no more room for strategy, moving forward when every reasonable calculation said to move back. Neither of DeLuca's men at the gate were dead when it was over, which was a decision Vincent made in the first half-second of contact. One had a broken orbital socket and would not be working for approximately 3 months. The other was zip-tied to the chain-link fence with his own restraints and was going to have a very unpleasant conversation with federal authorities within the next 48 hours. The man at the northwest corner of the fence heard the noise and came around the outside at a run, which was the correct tactical response, and arrived at the gate to find a situation that had already resolved itself, and made the intelligent choice to reverse direction and return to the vehicle. Dario's car came around the south end of Archer Avenue 60 seconds later. Vincent was already at the east wall when Cole brought Hazel through the culvert. She came through it on her good elbow and her knees with her dark hair matted and the hospital clothes dirty from the concrete and the letter still in her hand, because she had kept it through a drainage culvert in a moment of genuine physical danger, which told him something specific about what that letter meant to her. She stood up, looked at him, assessed him with her eyes in the systematic way she did. "You're bleeding," she said. He looked down. The left side of his shirt, where one of DeLuca's men had gotten a knife across his ribs before the situation resolved, was dark and wet. Not arterial. Painful, and something that needed attention, but not the kind of thing that killed you quickly. "Car," he said. "Now." They were 20 minutes north of the city before Vincent let himself acknowledge that the injury required immediate attention and allowed Dario to call their medical contact, a former trauma surgeon named Peter Haas, who operated out of a private clinic in Evanston that existed technically as a sports medicine practice and practically as the kind of facility where men like Vincent Moretti could receive medical care without paperwork that entered the official record. Hazel sat in the back seat beside him during the drive and did not look at the blood and did not ask unnecessary questions. She looked out the window at the city passing and held the letter flat on her knee with both hands, left arm stiff from the stitched shoulder, and was silent with the quality of silence that was doing something rather than simply being empty. At some point during the drive, she said, without looking at him, "Tommy was one of yours." "Yes." "He told DeLuca where we were." "Yes." She was quiet for another minute. "Were you close to him?" He considered the question. "He was loyal for 15 years, he said. Whatever his reasons for this, money, fear, something DeLuca offered him, 15 years is real. I don't make it nothing." She turned from the window and looked at him with an expression that was doing something complicated. "My mom said the worst betrayals are always from the people you trusted long enough to forget to watch." He looked at her. "She was right," he said, and felt the truth of it, in the same place you felt things that were both accurate and late. Peter Haas stitched the wound in a clean white room that smelled of antiseptic, while Hazel sat in the waiting area under Dario's supervision and examined the contents of the cloth bag from the lockbox. She'd brought it through the culvert in the pocket of the hospital clothes, along with the photograph and the letter, having made a series of rapid judgments about what to take in a moment of genuine crisis that Vincent was going to be thinking about for a long time. When Haas was done and Vincent's shirt was replaced with a clean one from the clinic's supply cabinet, he went to the doorway of the waiting area. Dario was standing by the window. Hazel was on the vinyl bench with the cloth bag open on her knee and a collection of small objects arranged on the seat beside her. 7 coins, old ones, foreign, a different country on each, a folded piece of paper, a small brass compass, and a photograph he hadn't seen before. She looked up when he came in. "She traveled," Hazel said. "Before I was born. She never told me." She held up one of the coins. "This one is Polish. This one is from Vietnam. This one is—" She turned it over. "I don't know this one." "Hungarian," Vincent said, looking at it from across the room. "Pre-1990. Hazel looked at the coin, then at him. "How do you know that?" "I've seen it before." He crossed the room and sat in the chair across from her. "Your mother studied international economics in college. She spent 2 years abroad before she came back to Chicago. She never talked about it much. Said the traveling taught her that the world was mostly the same problem in different currencies." Something moved across Hazel's face. A small, involuntary thing. The expression of someone receiving information about a person they loved from a source they were still deciding about. It lasted a second and was replaced by the careful neutral that was her default. She picked up the folded piece of paper, unfolded it, read it. Her face went still in a different way. Not the controlled neutral, but the specific stillness of someone reading something they did not expect. "What is it?" Vincent said. She looked up. Her eyes had something in them that he hadn't seen before in 2 days of watching her face. Genuine confusion. Not the managed uncertainty of someone processing information, but the raw, disorienting confusion of someone whose existing map of the world had just failed to account for a major feature. She held out the paper. He took it and read it. It was a letter. Not to Hazel. Addressed in Clara's handwriting to a name he didn't recognize, D. Farrow, and dated 14 months ago, 4 months before Clara died. It was short. 4 sentences. "Daniel, I know you've been watching. I know who you're working for. If anything happens to me before Hazel is safe, the drive has everything. She knows where it is." Vincent read it twice, then a third time. "Who is Daniel Farrow?" Hazel said. Her voice was very quiet and very precise. "I don't know," Vincent said. "My mom did." She was watching him with the systematic attention she turned on everything, and what was in it now was not the wary distance of the last 2 days, but something more urgent. She knew someone was watching her, a year before she died. She knew someone was following her, and she wrote a letter about a drive, and she put it in a box with my things. The drive. The thumb drive in the lockbox, sitting open on the floor of Unit 114 on Archer Avenue, left behind in the 12 seconds they'd had to move. The drive that DeLuca's people were now in possession of. "Dario," Vincent said. Dario was already at the door. "I heard." "The lockbox, Unit 114. Tell me our people got there first." The pause that followed was 3 seconds long. Dario was not a man who paused. "DeLuca's 4th man," Dario said. "The one who went back to the vehicle. He didn't go back to the vehicle." Vincent set the letter down on his knee. "He went to the unit," Dario said. "Our people arrived at the facility 40 seconds after you were clear. The unit was open. The lockbox was open." Another pause. "The thumb drive is gone." The room was very quiet. Hazel was looking at him with the expression of someone who had already understood what the silence meant and was waiting to see what he was going to do with it. "Find Tommy Reardon," Vincent said. His voice had gone to a register that was below anger. The place below anger where things were colder and more permanent. "Alive. I want him alive." Tommy Reardon was found at 4:45 p.m. in an apartment in Bridgeport that nobody in the Moretti organization had known he kept, which was itself informative. A secondary address, paid in cash, maintained in a name that wasn't his. The kind of address a man maintained when he was planning to need to disappear. He hadn't disappeared yet. Vincent didn't know whether that was because Tommy hadn't had time, or because some part of Tommy, 15 years of something that might once have been loyalty, compressed now into whatever shape it took after you sold the people who'd trusted you, had decided that running was worse than facing what was coming. The apartment was small and overheated and smelled of cigarettes, and Tommy Reardon was sitting at the kitchen table in his shirt sleeves when Vincent came through the door, and he looked like a man who had made a decision and was now living in the minutes after it, when the decision was over and what was left was just consequence. He was 51, same as Vincent. They'd known each other since they were in their 30s, which meant Tommy had been present for the years when the Moretti organization had consolidated its position, had survived federal scrutiny, had built the specific kind of power that came from strategic patience rather than impulse. He'd been competent and trusted and there. Vincent sat across from him at the kitchen table without saying anything for a moment. Tommy didn't look away. That was something. The men who looked away were the ones trying to escape inside their own heads. Tommy looked at him directly, with the steady, beaten-down look of a man who had decided on honesty now that deception had expired. "DeLuca had my son," Tommy said. Vincent was quiet. "Brendan. He's been in over his head with some people on the south side for about 8 months. Gambling situation that got complicated. DeLuca's people acquired the debt 4 months ago." Tommy's hands were flat on the table, not moving. "They said they'd clear it if I gave them what they needed. They said if I didn't—" He stopped. "Brendan's 23 years old." "Tommy," Vincent said. "I know," Tommy said. "I know what I did." "The girl," Vincent said. "You gave them the girl." Tommy closed his eyes. I gave them your location on Archer Avenue. I didn't know. I thought DeLuca wanted to talk. I thought he wanted leverage to force a sit-down, not what you thought doesn't matter, Vincent said. Not cruelly, just accurately. What happened is what matters. Tommy opened his eyes. They were red at the rims. Is she okay? Yes. A breath that was mostly relief and partly grief, the specific grief of a man who'd caused harm and received news that the harm hadn't been fatal. I'm sorry, Vincent. I know it doesn't count for much right now. No, Vincent said. It doesn't. He stood up. Where's Brendan now? Tommy blinked. What? Your son. Where is he, Lime? I don't know. DeLuca's people had him somewhere. I haven't been able to reach him since yesterday. Dario. Vincent spoke toward the doorway. Brendan Reardon. Locate and extract immediate priority. South side, DeLuca connected location. Dario, in the doorway, made a sound of confirmation and stepped back to work his phone. Tommy was staring at him. You're going to get him out? Yes. After what Brendan didn't do anything, Vincent said. He's 23 years old and he made bad decisions and DeLuca used him against you and by extension against me. The chain of responsibility is clear. He looked at Tommy with the full weight of 30 years of knowing him. You're going to answer for this. Not here, not today, but you're going to answer for it, and the process of that is going to be longer and more complicated than either of us wants. But your son is not the one answering. Tommy put his face in his hands. Vincent left him there. The drive was the problem. That was what Vincent was sitting with at 6 p.m. in the back room of the Evanston Clinic. While Hazel slept, finally, after 40 hours, genuinely slept, on the examination table with a blanket over her, and the photograph of Clara in her good hand, the way small children held things while they slept, without making the decision to. The drive that Clara had prepared, that she'd told someone named Daniel Farrow about, which meant Farrow had known it existed, which meant DeLuca, through whatever chain of acquisition had led to Farrow, now knew it existed and now had it. Whatever was on that drive, Clara had considered it significant enough to mention in a letter to someone who apparently worked for people who were watching her. She'd considered it significant enough to tell Hazel it existed, she knows where it is, without telling Hazel directly, which was the move of a woman who trusted her daughter's intelligence to find something when the time came, while also understanding that explicit knowledge was a vulnerability. Sylvia Crane called at 6:12. Daniel Farrow, Sylvia said, without greeting. Former mid-level in the DeLuca organization. Ran logistics on the South Side for about 6 years, then dropped out of the structure around 3 years ago. Current employment unknown, current location unknown. A pause. He's not nobody, Vincent. He was DeLuca's procurement specialist, the man who found things for DeLuca that DeLuca didn't want to acquire through regular channels. Including information. Including specifically information about the Moretti organization's structural vulnerabilities. Vincent was quiet for a moment, and Clara knew his name. Clara apparently knew him personally, Sylvia said. I found a phone record trail from the Indianapolis period. She and Farrow spoke 7 times in an 8-month window, 3 years ago. Then the calls stop. What would Clara's connection to a DeLuca logistics man be? I don't know yet, but here's the part that's going to matter to you. Sylvia's voice shifted. The shift he'd learned to recognize as the arrival of information that reorganized everything that came before it. I pulled the DCFS file through my contact there. Hazel's file has a flag on it that was placed 14 months ago, same time as the letter in the lockbox was dated. The flag is a protective custody notation, the kind that gets placed when there's an active threat assessment for a minor. Who placed it? That's the part, Sylvia said. It's not a DCFS staff notation. It's an external authorization, filed through a law firm, Clement and Associates, Michigan Avenue. She paused. Clement and Associates does work for the state attorney's office, specifically for the Organized Crime Division. Vincent sat very still. Clara Rowan, Sylvia said carefully, was cooperating with the state attorney's office. The file flag was part of a witness protection adjacent arrangement for Hazel in the event that Clara's cooperation became known before Clara died. The room was very quiet. The clock on the wall of the clinic's back room moved from 6:14 to 6:15 with a small mechanical click. She was giving them the drive, Vincent said. That's my read, Sylvia said. She had documentation on the DeLuca organization, from Pharaoh, and she was going to hand it to the state attorney before she died so that the thing that had been watching her for 12 years would be dismantled before her daughter was left alone in a city where it still operated, Sylvia said. Yes. Clara Rowan, 30 years old and pregnant, leaving a man she loved because his world was too dangerous. 12 years of moving, building a life, training her daughter to survive in a landscape she hoped she'd never have to navigate. Getting sick, coming home to die. And in the last 14 months of her life, doing the thing that the sick, tired, dying version of her had found the energy to do. Acquiring the documentation that would remove the specific threat she'd been most afraid of for 12 years, and positioning it to be delivered after she was gone. She had been trying to protect Hazel from DeLuca, specifically, which meant she'd known about DeLuca, specifically, which meant Pharaoh had told her something during those 7 phone calls that had given her an understanding of the threat landscape that Vincent himself hadn't possessed. DeLuca had been watching Clara for years, not because of Vincent, because of what Clara had been building toward. The drive is the state attorney's case, Vincent said. Probably. And DeLuca has it. Yes. So he now knows the full scope of Clara's cooperation, every name she documented, every transaction, everything she gave Pharaoh to give to the state attorney's office. He looked at the closed door of the examination room where Hazel was sleeping. And he knows Hazel exists, and he knows I've acknowledged her. Vincent. He's going to take her, Vincent said. Not a question, not a hypothesis. The flat declaration of a man who had just mapped the full shape of the problem he was inside. He can't let me dismantle him. The drive tells him I now have enough motive and enough material through Clara's cooperation to finish what she started. The only leverage he has left is Hazel. That's the shape of it, Sylvia said quietly. He ended the call. Sat in the room with the clock ticking and the shape of it. What Clara had spent 12 years building, the documentation, the contacts, the carefully constructed cooperation with the state attorney's office, had been intended to burn DeLuca's operation to the ground before Hazel was old enough to be in the crosshairs. It had not worked out that way, because Clara had died with the work unfinished and the drive still in a storage unit, and now the drive was gone, and DeLuca had it, and DeLuca knew everything. And tonight, or tomorrow morning at the latest, because DeLuca moved fast under pressure, and he was operating now under maximum pressure. They were coming for an 11-year-old girl. Vincent opened the examination room door. Hazel was awake. She was sitting up on the table with the blanket around her shoulders, looking at the door with the expression that told him she'd been awake for some time. You heard, he said. Not the words, she said. But your voice changed. She looked at him steadily. They're going to come for me. Yes. Because of what my mom was building. Because of what your mother started and we need to finish, he said. It came out differently than he'd intended. Not just operational, not just strategic, but with the weight of something he was committing to in the moment of saying it. He heard it. From the slight change in her expression, so did she. The drive is gone, she said. Yes. She was quiet for a moment, then, there were 2 drives. He looked at her. I didn't know what it was at the time, she said, but my mom made me memorize where things were. A year ago, when she was still well enough to drive, she took me somewhere in the city and showed me a second location, a different kind of storage. She paused. She said it was a copy of something important. She said if something ever happened and I needed to find it, I would know when. Hazel, I know when, she said, quietly. Definitely. She made a copy, Vincent. He looked at her. This child sitting in a clinic blanket with Clara's eyes and the specific, deliberate courage of someone who had been prepared for exactly this moment by a woman who had loved her enough to build her into something that could survive it. Where? He said. She told him. And Vincent Moretti, who had spent 30 years being the most dangerous thing in whatever room he occupied, felt the machinery of everything he'd built and everything he'd done and everything he'd been shift around this new axis. A child's voice in a hospital room, a letter in a drainage culvert, a dead woman's plan coming forward through the only person she'd trusted to carry it. He stood up. We move tonight, he said. I know, Hazel said. I've been ready. The second drive was in a library. Not a storage unit, not a safety deposit box, not any of the places a man like Vincent would have thought to look, but a public library branch on South Halsted Street, in the children's section, inside a hollow-backed copy of a book about birds of the Great Lakes region that Clara Rowan had checked out and returned 11 times over 3 years without ever actually borrowing it, which meant it lived permanently on the shelf, which meant nobody touched it, which meant it was the safest place in Chicago. Hazel told him this in the car on the way there, sitting in the back seat between Vincent and Dario, the clinic blanket still around her shoulders, her voice steady and methodical the way it was when she was delivering information she'd been holding and had decided the time for holding it was over. "She took me there when I was 9, Hazel said. She showed me the book. She said if I ever needed to find something important, I would find it inside the bird that nobody watches." "The bird that nobody watches," Vincent repeated. "There's a chapter on the common grackle," Hazel said. She said nobody cares about grackles. They're everywhere, so nobody looks at them. Dario made a sound in the front seat that was almost appreciative. "Smart woman," he said quietly. "Yes," Vincent said. She was. The library closed at 8 p.m. It was currently 7:11 Chang. They made it with 22 minutes to spare, which was exactly enough time and not a minute more, because Dario's phone produced 3 rapid alerts at 7:09 indicating that 2 vehicles registered to a shell company connected to DeLuca's logistics network had been identified on the south end of Halsted Street, moving north. "They're tracking us," Cole said from the driver's seat. "No," Vincent said. "They're tracking the pattern. They know the drive is gone from Archer Avenue. They know Clara had a connection to this neighborhood. They're covering ground." He looked at Hazel. "We have one shot at this." "I know," she said. "You go in with Cole. You get the book. You come out the side entrance on the west side of the building, not the front. 60 seconds maximum." "I know the library," she said, with the patience of someone reminding an adult that they had provided this information already. 60 seconds, Hazel." She looked at him. "I heard you the first time." She and Cole went in through the front entrance at 7:13. Vincent sat in the car with Dario and watched the south end of Halsted Street where the 2 vehicles had last been tracked and felt the specific quality of waiting that was different from all other waiting. The kind where the variable you couldn't control was a person rather than a situation, and the person was someone you had only started to understand you could not afford to lose. "If they get to her before Cole gets her out," Dario started. "They won't," Vincent said. "Vincent, they won't," he said again. Not because he was certain, because certainty was the only posture available to him in this moment, the only thing that kept the machinery running. And he had learned early and thoroughly that the moment you permitted doubt into your operational thinking was the moment the thing you were afraid of became more likely. Cole came out the west side entrance at 7:15 with Hazel beside him and a book about Great Lakes birds under his arm. They were back in the car by 7:16. The 2 DeLuca vehicles turned onto Halsted at 7:17. Dario pulled out heading north before they reached the library block. In the back seat, Hazel had the book open on her knee and was working the hollow backing with her good hand, her left arm pressed against her side, her face tight with the effort and the shoulder and the concentration. She got it open. Inside, taped to the backing board, was a thumb drive identical to the one in the Archer Avenue lockbox. She peeled it free, held it up. It was very small, the size of a thumbnail, the kind of object that looked like nothing and contained everything. "My mom made a copy," Hazel said, "because she knew if anything happened to the first one, there had to be a second." Vincent looked at the drive in her hand. "Your mother," he said carefully, "planned for every version of this that she could imagine. She planned for every version except the one where she ran out of time before she could finish it herself," Hazel said. And there was no bitterness in it, just the clean, precise grief of a child who had understood exactly what her mother had been and what her mother had tried to do and why it hadn't been enough and why that wasn't the same as failure. He took the drive from her hand when she held it out. "What do we do with it?" she asked. "We finish what she started," he said. The state attorney's contact was a woman named Rachel Foss, and she answered her personal cell at 7:43 p.m. with the immediate alertness of someone who had been waiting for a call she'd known was coming and hadn't known when. "The Faro materials?" Vincent said, without introduction. A pause on her end, then, "Who is this?" "Someone who has what Clara Rowan was building toward. A complete copy." and a personal motivation to see it delivered tonight, rather than through channels that DeLuca has time to compromise. Another pause. Longer. Where? You come to me, he said. Alone. One location. I'll send it in the next 5 minutes. Mister, the drive has everything, he said. Every transaction, every name, every structural connection in the DeLuca organization going back 6 years. Clara built it with Pharaoh's cooperation, and she built it to be complete. You know what it's worth. He paused. And you know that DeLuca currently has the original, which means your window to move on it before he neutralizes the exposure is measured in hours, not days. Rachel Foss was quiet for 4 seconds. Send the location, she said. The meet was in a parking structure in Wicker Park that Vincent's people swept in 17 minutes. Not enough time to be certain of anything, but enough to be as certain as the night permitted. Foss came alone, or as alone as a state attorney's investigator could come, which meant her backup was parked 2 blocks east and trying not to be visible, which they mostly managed. She was mid-40s, short, with the kind of face that had been made for skepticism and had spent 20 years exercising it. She looked at Vincent across the hood of the car with the expression of a woman doing a rapid cost-benefit analysis and arriving at a conclusion she didn't entirely love. The Moretti organization and the state attorney's office, she said. This is a new configuration. Clara Rowan spent 14 months building a case that ends DeLuca's operation, Vincent said. She built it because she understood that DeLuca had been watching her for years, and that when she died, her daughter would be alone in a city where DeLuca still operated. She did this on her own. She delivered it to Pharaoh because she trusted Pharaoh to get it to you. He set the drive on the hood of the car between them. She was wrong to trust Pharaoh completely, as it turned out. But the work itself is sound, verified by the person who's been in a position to know. And what do you want in exchange for this? DeLuca ends tonight, he said. Not next quarter. Not after a 2-year investigation. Tonight, using what's on this drive, you have enough for an emergency warrant package. I want his operation dismantled before morning. Foss looked at the drive, then at him. And the Moretti organization? Is a separate conversation for a different night, he said. Tonight there's one problem and one solution. She picked up the drive, turned it over in her fingers, looked at him with eyes that had seen a significant number of people in his position try to thread a needle between their own interests and the law and usually fail. Clara Rowan's daughter, she said. She's with you. Yes. She's safe. For now, he said, which is why tonight matters. Foss closed her fingers around the drive. I need 2 hours to build the package. You have 90 minutes, he said. After that, DeLuca moves. She looked at him for one more second. Then she turned and walked back to her car, and Vincent watched her go with the specific feeling of a man who had just transferred the center of gravity of a problem he'd spent 30 years believing he had to solve himself into someone else's hands, and was finding the sensation simultaneously necessary and deeply uncomfortable. Dario appeared at his shoulder. You trust her? I trust her interests align with the outcome I need, Vincent said. That's sufficient for tonight. And tomorrow? Vincent looked at the empty space where Rachel Foss's car had been. Tomorrow is a different calculation, he said. What? DeLuca moved at 9:47 p.m. Not toward the state attorney's office. He didn't know about that yet. He moved toward the last position his people had tracked Vincent's vehicle, which was a Moretti-connected property in the Ravenswood neighborhood that Dario had deliberately and visibly accessed 40 minutes earlier, specifically to give DeLuca a target to move on. Vincent was not in Ravenswood. He was 3 miles south, in a decommissioned steel processing facility on the edge of the river district that his organization had owned through a shell company for 11 years and had never used for anything except this kind of contingency. An off-book location, known to 6 people, large enough to control and defend, isolated enough that whatever happened inside it stayed inside it. Hazel was there too. That had been the argument, the one argument he'd had with Dario in 22 years of not arguing with Dario. And it had lasted 4 minutes in the car outside the Wicker Park parking structure, and it had ended the way arguments ended when one party was Vincent Moretti and the other was an 11-year-old girl who had survived a bullet, a drainage culvert, and the total reorganization of her understanding of her own life in 48 hours, and was not, she explained with absolute calm, going to be put somewhere safe and excluded from the resolution of something that had started with her mother. She built this, Hazel had said, meaning Clara. She built all of it for me. I'm not going to be in another room when it ends. Vincent had looked at her for a long time. You stay back, he'd said. You don't engage. You observe. I know how to observe, she said. And if it goes wrong, Cole gets me out, she said. I know. He hadn't said yes. He also hadn't said no. And she was here, in the upper level of the steel facility, behind a structural pillar with Cole, in the dark. Because sometimes the thing you couldn't justify and couldn't refuse were the same thing. Us. DeLuca arrived at 10:22 p.m. He came with 8 men, which was either overconfidence or desperation, and Vincent had been watching both possibilities for 3 days and had concluded it was both simultaneously. The specific combination that happened when a man who'd spent years being methodical felt the floor start to shift and responded by bringing more weight to bear on the problem, which was itself a way of losing your footing faster. The steel facility's main floor was enormous, 40 meters of raw concrete under a vaulted industrial ceiling, with rusted track systems for overhead cranes running the full length, and processing equipment that had been stripped but had left behind the structural skeleton of its function, hydraulic channels in the floor, steelwork platforms bolted to the walls at intervals, the smell of metal and old oil that never fully left a place like this. Vincent was standing in the center of it when DeLuca's people came through the east entrance. He was alone, visibly, which was the point. DeLuca came in third, which told Vincent that his read on the man had been accurate, not personally reckless, strategic about exposure, willing to let others absorb the initial risk of an entrance. I was wearing a dark coat over a suit, and he moved with the careful deliberateness of a man who had decided this conversation was going to go a specific way and had arranged sufficient force to ensure it. He stopped 15 feet from Vincent. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The facility breathed around them. Distant sounds of the river, the ambient noise of the city at the edge of the building, the ticking of cooling metal. You look surprisingly intact for a man who's had a difficult week, DeLuca said. You look like a man who moved too fast and knows it, Vincent said. DeLuca's eyes moved across the floor, the practiced scan of someone assessing the room. He was counting exits, counting variables, looking for the thing Vincent had hidden. Vincent watched him look and find nothing, and watched the slight recalibration that produced in DeLuca's posture. Where's the girl? DeLuca said. Safe. That's not an answer. It's the only answer you get. DeLuca tilted his head slightly. Vincent, I've known you for 20 years. I know how you think. You're here, alone, in an off-book location you didn't advertise, and you let my people find you here, which means you want this conversation. He paused. So let's have it. You built your intelligence operation on Clara Rowan, Vincent said. You've been watching her for 3 years because Pharaoh told you she was building a case. You had Pharaoh inside her trust. You were feeding her cooperation back to yourself, and you thought you controlled the exposure. He kept his voice level and his posture still. What you didn't know was that Clara was smarter than Pharaoh. She made a copy he didn't know existed, and the copy is already delivered. DeLuca's face did something. Not much, but enough. The specific tightening around the eyes of a man processing information that changes the geometry of his position. You're telling me the drive is already with the state attorney. I'm telling you that at this moment, Rachel Foss has been in her office for 45 minutes building an emergency warrant package using materials that document your operation in complete structural detail going back 6 years. Vincent looked at him. You have maybe an hour before that package is complete, and you're standing in a building 3 miles from your own people. DeLuca was quiet for 4 seconds. Behind him, Vincent could see his 8 men doing the math of this moment, the way men did when the situation they'd been briefed for turned out to be a different situation. Then you've already won, DeLuca said. So why are you here? Because the warrant ends your organization, Vincent said. It doesn't end you. Federally, you'll be insulated by enough structural distance from the documented transactions that your personal exposure is manageable. You'll survive it. You'll rebuild something smaller. He paused. And Hazel won't be safe. DeLuca looked at him. Something in his face had shifted to a register that was harder to read. The careful, analytical attention of a man deciding whether what he was hearing was a negotiation or a threat. What do you want? DeLuca said. You're going to make a call, Vincent said. Right now, to whoever in the federal structure you have access to. And I know you have access, because a man in your position always does. You're going to confirm to them that you are prepared to cooperate with the state attorney's investigation on the condition that the resulting agreement includes an explicit, documented, legally binding protection order for Hazel Rowan. By name. Permanently. He let that sit. In exchange, I deliver your 4 remaining senior lieutenants, the ones the Faro materials don't fully document, with enough corroborating evidence to complete the federal case and ensure you get a cooperation credit instead of a leadership charge. DeLuca stared at him. You're asking me to burn my own people. I'm asking you to survive, Vincent said. The alternative is that the warrant goes through tonight without your cooperation, your exposure is maximum, and the girl's name remains unprotected in the record, which means that whoever reconstitutes what's left of your organization in 2 years looks at that name and sees leverage. The facility was very quiet. Somewhere in the upper structure, something shifted, a sound that was probably the building settling, or wind through the crane rails, or Cole repositioning behind a pillar. DeLuca's jaw was tight. The 4 lieutenants. Yes. And I get cooperation credit. And Hazel Rowan gets her name in a protection order that makes her untouchable for the rest of her childhood. Vincent looked at him without expression. That's the deal. It's the only deal. And you have about 40 minutes before it expires. DeLuca was quiet for a long time. Long enough that 2 of his men behind him shifted their weight, reading the silence for instructions. Long enough that the river sounds outside the building cycled through a full pattern of noise. Then DeLuca reached into his breast pocket and took out his phone. One of his men said, "Marcus." "Shut up," DeLuca said, and dialed. The next 23 minutes were the longest of Vincent's life, which was a significant statement from a man who had lived the specific life he had lived. He stood on the main floor of the steel facility and listened to Marcus DeLuca have 2 phone calls that restructured the terms of an ongoing federal investigation in real time. And he cataloged every word of it with the systematic attention of a man who needed to be certain of what was being committed to before he committed to his own side of it. Dario's people had the 4 lieutenants by 10:51 p.m. They'd been under passive surveillance since the morning meeting in Bridgeport, and moving on them had required only the signal, which Vincent sent from the floor of the facility, while DeLuca was still on his second call. Rachel Foss's people moved on DeLuca's South Side properties at 11:06 p.m. At 11:14 p.m., DeLuca ended his second call and looked across 15 feet of concrete at Vincent and said, "The protection order will be in the federal record by morning. Her name, permanent status, reviewed annually until she's 18. Confirmed by Foss," Vincent said. "Confirmed by Foss," DeLuca said. A silence. "You're going to walk away from this," DeLuca said. It wasn't a question. It was the observation of a man calibrating the distance between what he'd expected this night to be and what it had become. 30 years, Vincent, everything you built, and you're going to walk away. "I'm going to start something different," Vincent said. "Because of the girl." "Because of several things," Vincent said. "The girl is the reason I moved fast enough to decide tonight." DeLuca looked at him with something that was not admiration and not contempt, but the specific look of one aging man, recognizing in another the presence of a choice he himself had never made and could no longer make. "She's 11 years old," he said. "Yes," Vincent said, "and she saved my life at a charity gala while eating a chocolate petit four. The least I can do is return the favor." DeLuca almost smiled at that. Then the moment passed, and he was what he was again, and he looked at the phone in his hand and at the 8 men behind him who were absorbing the specific texture of a night that had not gone as planned, and he said to no one in particular, "All right, let's go." His people walked out the east entrance. The facility went quiet. Vincent stood in the center of the floor and let out a breath that he'd been compressing for approximately 4 hours and felt the stitches in his left side pull with the expansion of his lungs and didn't care. From the upper level, footsteps on the steel walkway. Cole first, then Hazel, coming down the access stairs with the particular careful deliberateness of someone managing a bad shoulder and refusing to let it slow her down. She reached the main floor and walked across the concrete toward him and stopped 4 feet away, looking up at him with the assessing eyes that had been looking at him with various degrees of trust and skepticism and calculation for 2 days, and were doing something different now. The protection order, she said. In the federal record by morning, he said. She nodded slowly. The overhead crane rails were above them in the dark, and the river sound came through the walls, and the city outside was doing what the city always did. Indifferent, continuous, enormous. My mom would have called this a good outcome, Hazel said. Yes, Vincent said. She would have. She also would have said it's not actually over, Hazel said. Because the paperwork doesn't change what people want to do. It just changes what they can do openly. Also true, he said. Which is why what comes next matters. She looked at him. What comes next? He looked back at her. The man who had spent 30 years being the most dangerous thing in every room he occupied, standing in an empty steel facility at 11-something at night with a stitched knife wound in his ribs, and a daughter he'd known for 48 hours, and the full weight of what came next sitting between them like a thing that needed to be built rather than inherited. I don't know exactly, he said, but I know you're part of deciding it. Hazel Rowan stood on a concrete floor in the dark and considered this with the systematic, careful honesty she brought to everything. Then she said, okay. And that single syllable, not trustfully given, not forgiveness completed, not the resolution of everything that had been lost and broken and kept apart for 11 years, but the first genuine door opening in a wall that had been built with good reasons and could only be taken down from both sides, landed in the space between them with the specific weight of something that was going to matter for a very long time. Outside, the night held. Inside, for the first time in as long as either of them could measure, something else was beginning. The paperwork took 6 weeks, not the federal protection order that came through in 31 hours, exactly as DeLuca had committed, a 2-page document filed in the Northern District of Illinois under seal that named Hazel Rowan specifically and permanently as a protected minor with federal oversight status, reviewed annually, renewable until her 18th birthday. Rachel Foss called Vincent at 8:47 a.m. the morning after the steel facility to confirm it, and her voice carried the particular quality of a professional who had achieved something significant and was processing the cost of the method alongside the value of the result. The ferro materials are being authenticated now, Foss said. The warrant package is complete. We move on to Luca's remaining structure this afternoon. The cooperation agreement protects him from leadership charges, Vincent said. Yes, he'll face secondary counts. He'll survive it, legally. He won't survive it organizationally. A pause. The 4 lieutenants your people delivered are the keystone. We've been trying to document 2 of them for 4 years. Clara Rowan built the foundation, Vincent said. Whatever your office does with it, it came from her. A longer pause. We know, Foss said, and for the first time her voice carried something that wasn't purely professional. She came to us 14 months ago in a bad state physically, and she sat in my office for 3 hours, and she was thorough. She was more thorough than people who have been doing this for decades. Another pause. She talked about her daughter. She wanted me to know there was a daughter. Vincent sat with that. She wanted it on your record, he said. Yes, Foss said. She wanted Hazel's existence documented somewhere official before she died, so there was a record that couldn't be erased. A breath. I'm sorry for your loss, Mr. Moretti. Even complicated losses are losses. He thanked her and ended the call and stood at the window of the safe house in Evanston where they'd spent the night, looking at the lake going from gray to pale gold in the early morning, and held what Foss had told him in the specific way you held things that were simultaneously too late and exactly on time. Clara had walked into a state attorney's office, sick and dying, and made sure her daughter's name was in a record that would outlast her, had made sure there was a document that said, this child exists, this child matters, this child should be protected. It was the last thing she could do, and she had done it completely. He pressed his palm flat against the cold glass of the window and stayed there for a moment, not thinking, just being present in the morning with the lake and the weight of it. And then he straightened and went to find coffee and Hazel, in that order. The 6 weeks of paperwork were the legal architecture of dismantling. DCFS, the protection order, the guardianship filing, the school enrollment, the medical records transfer. Each of these was its own bureaucratic structure, with its own timeline and its own requirements. And Vincent moved through all of it with the same systematic attention he'd brought to running a criminal organization for 30 years, which turned out to be surprisingly applicable to navigating the legitimate world's institutional machinery. Once you accepted that patience was the primary tool in both contexts, his attorney, a careful woman named Diane Chen, who had spent 15 years keeping the Moretti organization's legitimate holdings clean and was now being asked to manage a transition she hadn't entirely anticipated, handled most of the filing herself with a professionalism that didn't ask unnecessary questions. The guardianship will be straightforward given the protection order and the absence of other biological claimants, she told him at their first meeting, with Hazel sitting in the chair beside Vincent's in Diane's Michigan Avenue office, examining the architectural details of the ceiling with the systematic interest she brought to every new environment. The DCFS case closure is more procedural. Patricia Ohen has been cooperative, and her documentation of the exceptional circumstances is solid. Ms. Ohen kept the key for 8 months, Hazel said, without lowering her gaze from the ceiling. My mom chose her specifically. She observed her for 2 placements before she asked her. Diane looked at her. Your mother chose the caseworker. She researched all of them, Hazel said. She had a list of criteria. She finally lowered her eyes from the ceiling and looked at Diane with the direct, assessing attention that made adults either uncomfortable or immediately respectful, and Diane Chen appeared to be the second kind. She was thorough about things that mattered. She was, Diane agreed, and made a note on her legal pad. Afterward, walking back to the car through the November wind off the lake, Hazel said, She seems good. Diane? Vincent said. She doesn't oversimplify things when she talks to me, Hazel said. Most adults do. They use shorter sentences and less precise vocabulary, like my comprehension decreases because I'm shorter than them. Diane doesn't have children, Vincent said. She may not have developed the habit. Hazel considered this. Is that why you don't do it? You didn't have children either, before. The word before sat between them in the cold air, delineating the landscape of the last month with its clean, simple geography. There was before the Harrington Museum, and there was after, and the 2 territories were so different from each other that it was sometimes difficult to believe they were inhabited by the same people. I don't do it, Vincent said, because you've made it clear you'll correct me when I get it wrong. The corner of her mouth did the thing, the almost smile, the one he'd been learning to read for 6 weeks. That's true, she said. I will. They got in the car. Cole drove north. The city moved past the windows in its November way. Stripped of summer's green, everything structural and exposed, the bones of the place visible in the leafless trees and the iron-gray sky. Tommy Reardon's accounting took 4 weeks and was handled privately, in the way the organization had always handled internal accountability, which was to say carefully, completely, and without violence. Vincent met with him once, in the sheet metal facility in Bridgeport, with nobody else present. Tommy's son Brendan had been extracted from DeLuca's custody the night of the steel facility confrontation, physically unharmed, and was currently in a situation that would take him a year to climb out of, but that he would survive. Tommy had been told this. Tommy had also been told that his role in the organization was over, that his financial stake would be settled at a fair valuation over 18 months, and that the specific nature of what he'd done, sold a location under duress, with his son's life as collateral, would be weighed against 15 years of genuine service in the manner it deserved to be weighed, which was to say seriously and without pretending either fact erased the other. What do you want from me? Tommy said, at the end of the meeting. Nothing, Vincent said. I want you to take care of Brendan. I want you to understand that what happened has consequences that don't go away because the immediate crisis resolved. And I want you to know that I understand why you did it. He looked at him across the steel table. That's not the same as it being acceptable, but it's also not the same as it being monstrous. Tommy was quiet for a long time. How's the girl? Learning to tolerate me, Vincent said, which is more than I had any right to expect. Something moved across Tommy's face, something that was grief and relief and the complicated arithmetic of a man trying to calculate what was owed and what was forgiven and finding that the 2 columns didn't balance and maybe never would. She's like Clara, he said, around the eyes. She's like both of us, Vincent said, which she'd probably prefer I didn't say out loud. Tommy almost smiled. It didn't complete itself, but the intention was there. Vincent stood. Take care of your son, Tommy. He left him in the sheet metal facility with the production floor humming its indifferent mechanical note outside the door, and walked back into the November cold and didn't look back. The North Shore house was too large. Vincent had known this in an abstract way for years, had bought it 22 years ago, when largeness was a form of statement, when the square footage and the lake view and the private dock had been the kind of thing that communicated position in a world where position was everything. He'd lived in it the way he lived in everything, efficiently, with minimal attachment to its particulars, maintaining what needed maintaining and using what was useful. Now it had a 12-year-old in it. She turned 12 in November, quietly, with a small dinner that Diane Chen attended and Dario attended and Cole attended, people who had become fixtures in the new configuration without anyone formally deciding they would be. And the largeness was a different kind of problem, not excess. More like a house that had been built for a life that was ending and was now being inhabited by a life that was beginning. And the fit wasn't wrong exactly, but it was approximate in a way that required adjustment. Hazel's adjustment to the house was systematic and practical, as her adjustment to everything was. She identified the rooms she used, established functional purposes for each of them, and disregarded the rest with the equanimity of someone who had lived in enough spaces to understand that a room's value was entirely a function of what you did in it. The library became hers primarily, not because she claimed it, but because she was in it every evening without exception, working through its previous contents with the focused efficiency of someone conducting an inventory, occasionally making small stacks of books she had opinions about and leaving them in places where Vincent would find them. He found, over the first 3 weeks, a book on structural engineering left on the kitchen counter, a biography of a woman pilot from the 1930s left on his desk, and a very old, very battered field guide to birds of the Great Lakes region left on the arm of his chair in the sitting room, which he was reasonably certain was a deliberate act of specific significance. He picked up the bird guide and held it for a moment, and then put it on the shelf in the library where she could see it had been received. The next morning, there was a grackle feather on the kitchen table. He had no idea where she'd found it. He left it where it was. The formal dissolution of the Moretti organization's criminal infrastructure took longer than 6 weeks. These things always did, because 30 years of structural complexity didn't unwind in a month. But the decision was made in the first week, and the implementation began immediately, and the direction of it never changed. Vincent worked with Diane Chen and 2 federal liaisons to structure an arrangement that had no clean precedent, a coordinated transfer of evidence on the organization's illegal operations, negotiated through Foss's office, in exchange for a framework that protected the legitimate businesses, the restaurants, the construction company, the property holdings, and their several hundred employees who had spent years working in places that were clean on the surface and had never been asked to be anything else. The corrupt leadership around those businesses, the men who had used them as cover, who had skimmed from them, who had threaded the illegal money through their accounts. Those men were named, documented, delivered. It was not a clean process. It was not comfortable. There were men who had been loyal and who found themselves named anyway because the nature of what they'd been loyal to made the naming unavoidable. And Vincent sat with the weight of each of those names the way you sat with the weight of choices that were right and also costly, and would not stop being costly because they were right. Dario was the hardest, not because Dario was named. He wasn't, specifically, because Dario's operational role had been protection and logistics, and his hands were cleaner than most, but because Dario had been beside him for 22 years and was now navigating a world in which the structure that had defined both their lives was being deliberately dismantled by the man who had built it. And Dario was doing this without complaint and without drama, and with the same quiet competence he brought to everything, which was itself a kind of loyalty that made the whole weight of it heavier. They talked about it once, directly, in December, on the dock behind the North Shore house in the cold, the lake frozen a few meters out and making its deep winter sounds beneath the ice. "You could have kept more of it," Dario said. "Not an accusation, an observation." "I could have kept the parts that were defensible," Vincent said. "But the defensible parts were built on the other parts. And you can't keep the top floor of a building after you've removed what it was standing on." Dario looked at the ice. "What does that make the last 30 years? "Complicated," Vincent said. "Real. And over." A long silence. The lake made its sound. The cold was the specific dry cold of a Chicago December. the kind that got into your bones and stayed. The security company, Dario said. If you want it, Vincent said. I'm not asking you to stay out of obligation. I know, Dario said. I'm asking because I want to know if the job is real. It's real, Vincent said. Protection services for legitimate clients, personal security, site assessment, threat analysis. There's a market for people who are actually good at this, rather than people who present the appearance of being good at it. He looked out at the frozen lake. The organization spent 30 years producing people who are genuinely excellent at keeping other people safe. That skill exists regardless of what context it was built in. I want to use it for something that doesn't require me to explain it away. Dario was quiet for a moment, then, Cole's already in. I know. He told the girl first, apparently. She told him she thought it was a logical application of existing competencies. Vincent turned to look at him. She said that. Verbatim, according to Cole. He turned back to the lake and felt, somewhere in the architecture of his chest, the thing that kept happening when he wasn't prepared for it. The small, persistent warmth of a person becoming real to you. The specific weight of someone taking up space in your thinking in a way that changed the shape of everything around it. Tell Cole his job is confirmed, he said. Patricia Ohen came to the house in January. She came on a Saturday morning, called ahead, brought nothing except herself and a manila envelope that she held in her lap in the sitting room while Vincent made coffee. He didn't particularly want because having something to do with his hands was useful in situations with a specific weight to them. Hazel sat across from Patricia in the chair she'd claimed as hers in the first week, positioned, as all her preferred positions were, with a clear sightline to the room's entrance and a wall at her back. Your mom asked me to give you one more thing, Patricia said. She held out the envelope. She said to wait until you were somewhere that felt like it had a future in it. She said you'd know when that was. Hazel took the envelope, held it in both hands, looked at it with the expression she got when she was managing something large in a container that was almost big enough, the controlled, deliberate composure of Clara Rowan's daughter in a moment that mattered. Did you read it? Hazel asked. No, Patricia said. She sealed it in front of me and told me not to. Hazel nodded once, set the envelope on the arm of her chair. They sat in the sitting room for another 40 minutes, the three of them, and talked about the school Hazel had started attending in January, a small, academically serious place in Evanston that she had selected herself from a list of options Vincent had given her, on the grounds that its library was the largest per student of any school in the North Shore area, which he had not considered a primary criterion but had decided not to argue with. Patricia asked about the teachers, and Hazel described them with the precise, unsentimental assessments she brought to all people. This one was rigorous but impatient with questions that interrupted her pacing, that one knew the material deeply but organized it poorly. The third was less expert but had the quality of attention that made you feel your thinking was worth developing. She sounds like her mother, Patricia told Vincent quietly when Hazel went to the kitchen for water. Yes, Vincent said. She does. Patricia looked at him with the direct, practical gaze of a woman who had spent 20 years assessing situations that required honesty rather than comfort. You're doing all right with this, she said. Not a compliment exactly. More like a field report. Some days better than others, he said. That's accurate for anyone, she said. When she left, Hazel stood at the window and watched her car go down the drive, and then stood there for a while looking at the winter garden beyond the glass. Bare trees, gray sky, the distant glitter of the lake. She had the envelope in her hand. You don't have to open it today, Vincent said from the doorway. I know, she said. Or this week. I know. She turned from the window. She was looking at him with the full attention she deployed for things that required her to be entirely present and entirely honest simultaneously. Will you stay in the room? She asked. When I open it. He looked at her. Yes, he said. If you want me to. I think she would have wanted someone here, Hazel said. She didn't like to be the only person carrying things. She used to say that weight distributes better over a larger surface area. A pause. She was talking about physics, but she wasn't only talking about physics. He crossed the room and sat in the chair across from hers, and she sat in her chair, and she opened the envelope. There were 2 pages. She read them in the same silence she'd read the first letter, the one from the storage unit, but the quality of the silence was different this time, less like controlled endurance and more like absorption, like a person genuinely taking something in rather than bracing for it. He watched her face and did not look away, because she had asked him to be here, and being here meant being present for the actual moment rather than a polite approximation of it. She read to the end of the first page and turned to the second and read the first half of it and then stopped. Not because she was done, because something on the page had reached a place that the controlled composure didn't cover, and for a moment, a single, real moment, her face showed exactly what it felt, which was grief and love and the irreversible specific ache of someone who was loved completely by a person who was no longer anywhere she could reach. She sat with it for a breath, 2 breaths. Then she folded the letter carefully along the original creases and put it back in the envelope, and held the envelope in her lap with both hands. She said she was sorry she couldn't be here for this part, Hazel said. Her voice was steady, and also, underneath the steady, something else. She said she hoped the person I was with when I opened this was someone who was earning it. A pause. She said she hoped it was you. She said she thought you would try. Vincent sat with that. She was right that I'd try, he said carefully. Whether I'm earning it is something you're in a better position to assess than I am. Hazel looked at him across the space between their chairs, the sitting room with its winter light coming through the tall windows, and the lake barely visible at the edge of the view, and the grackle feather still on the kitchen table where he'd left it because removing it would have been the wrong call. You're doing okay, she said, for someone who's new at it. That's a generous evaluation, he said. It's an accurate one, she said. I don't do generous. My mom said generous evaluations were a form of imprecision. She was right, he said. She was right about most things, Hazel said, except she was wrong that you wouldn't have chosen differently. She said it without drama, without build-up, the way she said everything that mattered, plainly, directly, as a statement of conclusion reached through evidence. She was wrong about that. I think she knew she was wrong about it, which is why she couldn't send the letter. She looked down at the envelope in her lap. Fear of being right is still fear. He didn't trust his voice for a moment, so he didn't use it. The winter light moved through the room in its slow January way, and the house was quiet around them, and below them, through the walls, the lake made its perpetual sound. The sound it had been making for longer than the city, longer than any of the things people built on its shore. The sound that continued regardless of what the people near it did with their brief, difficult lives. She left you something too, Hazel said. He looked up. She held out the envelope. Inside, behind the 2 pages of Hazel's letter, was a single folded piece of paper he hadn't seen her find. He took it, unfolded it. 4 words, in Claire's handwriting. He was worth it. He sat with those 4 words in the sitting room of the house on the North Shore on a January morning and felt them move through every layer of 30 years of armor and reach the place underneath it that he had kept compressed and controlled and separate for so long that he'd sometimes wondered whether it was still there, and found that it was, and held it, and did not look away from what it felt like. Hazel let him have the moment. She understood the necessity of moments. Her mother had taught her that too. In February, Vincent filed the formal paperwork establishing Moretti Protective Services as a licensed security consulting firm in the state of Illinois. The name was Hazel's suggestion, she had pointed out, during one of their dinner conversations that had begun to develop the specific rhythm of 2 people genuinely interested in each other's thinking, that maintaining the family name in the legitimate context was a different kind of statement than abandoning it, and that the statement it made was more honest. It says you're not pretending the past didn't happen, she said, eating the pasta she'd made herself because she had decided in January that learning to cook was a logical skill and had been working through it systematically since. It just says you're building something different on top of it. That's more accurate than a clean break. Most people would say a clean break is better optics, he said. Most people prioritize optics over accuracy, she said. That seems like a consistent mistake. He filed the paperwork with Moretti Protective Services as the name. The first clients were 3 of the legitimate restaurant businesses from the old network, which hired the firm for professional security assessment and staff training. The second was a referral from Diane Chen, a private equity firm on Michigan Avenue that had been receiving credible threats. The third was a call from Rachel Foss's office, which Vincent took with the mild irony of a man who had learned to find the appropriate register for situations that didn't have clean precedents. Dario ran operations. Cole ran field assignments. 3 other people from the old structure joined in the first month. People who had been, in various ways, on the right side of things throughout their careers, and had skills that translated cleanly once the context changed. It was not the same as what had been. It was not supposed to be. It was something built deliberately, with full awareness of what it was built from and what it was built for, and there was a specific quality to work done that way. A weight to it, a sense of the ground being solid, that was different from the quality of work done at speed and in darkness. Vincent noticed the difference every morning when he went into the office on the fourth floor of a building in River North, and found it worth noticing. Boss. The locket sat on Hazel's desk in the library for most of the winter. Not forgotten. She looked at it, he'd noticed, in the evening sometimes, picked it up and turned it over, read the engraving on the back, set it down again. She was processing something about it in the careful, iterative way she processed everything that mattered, circling it over time until she understood what it was and what to do with it. In March, she came to him in his kitchen one morning while he was making coffee, and she had the locket in her hand. "I want to put something in it," she said, "but I don't want to take out what's already there." He turned from the coffee maker. She held the locket out, open. Inside, in the oval frame, was a photograph so small it was almost abstract. A woman, younger than Hazel's memory of her, standing somewhere bright, laughing. "Your mother," he said. "From before I was born," Hazel said. "She put it in herself, I don't know when." She looked at the photograph. "I want to put something next to it, but it's a small space." "What did you want to put in it?" She held up, in her other hand, a photograph she'd printed at the school's computer lab, trimmed to the right dimensions with the precision she brought to everything physical. It was a photograph taken 6 weeks earlier, on the dock behind the North Shore house. Dario had taken it, unsolicited, on a day when the ice had broken up and the lake had come back to itself, and they'd gone out on the dock in the cold to watch it, and the photograph was of Vincent and Hazel standing at the end of the dock looking at the water, and it looked like what it was. It looked like a father and a daughter. Hazel looked at him across the kitchen with the clear, direct eyes that were Clara's and the jaw that was his and the specific particular person she was. Nobody else's template, nobody's inheritance, just herself, 11 years and 4 months old, and carrying everything she'd been given and everything she'd survived and everything she was still building. "I think there's room," she said, "if we put them side by side." He crossed the kitchen and took the locket from her hand, and she gave him the photograph, and he worked the small frame with his fingers until it was open wide enough. And he set the new photograph beside the old one with the care you gave to things that were going to be kept. He handed it back to her. She looked at both photographs in the locket for a moment, her expression doing the complicated thing it did when she was feeling something she had decided it was acceptable to feel. Then she closed it and put the chain around her neck and fastened it the way she'd been doing all her life, and picked up her school bag from the chair by the door. "I'm going to be late," she said. "You have 12 minutes, he said. 11 now, she said, and went out the door. He stood in the kitchen and listened to her footsteps on the path outside, and the sound of Cole starting the car, and the specific ordinary morning sound of a life organizing itself around the presence of another person, and felt the full specific weight of it, not the weight of what had been lost, not the weight of 30 years of blood and empire, not the weight of a woman who had loved him and left him and spent 12 years protecting the child she'd taken with her, but the weight of what was here, what was real, what was present in this kitchen on a March morning with the coffee made and the school bag gone and the sound of the car going down the drive. The silver locket was around his daughter's neck with 2 photographs in it. One of them was new. He poured his coffee and stood at the window and watched the lake, which was fully itself again after the winter, moving and enormous and continuous, doing what it had always done, making its sound, holding its own, indifferent to and also the backdrop of everything the small human lives on its shore had managed to do and become and survive. Outside, the car turned onto the road. The morning held, and Vincent Moretti stood in a kitchen that was his and also hers, and therefore for the first time in a very long time, genuinely his, and drank his coffee and let the quiet be what it was, not absence, not armor, not the compressed silence of a man keeping something contained, but the simple, earned, improbable quiet of a life that had finally found what it was supposed to be standing for. It was enough. It was, against all reasonable calculation, more than enough. It was everything.